turn this on?
Oh, it's on. Okay, good. All right. 6 p.m. we will call our work session to order. First thing is Parks and Rec. So, in no certain order, only because it's the first one on my page, is Zan. Come on up and have a seat. Well, thank you for coming. Did you have a good time with your tryouts the last time? I bet y'all had. Y'all have a lot of people.
Like 493.
That's a lot for a town this size. All right, I got about 5 questions that I'll ask that we've asked everybody, and then these guys here will have the opportunity to ask you anything if they want to. So, first question, easy. Are you a property owner in Robinson?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And why are you interested in serving on the Parks and Rec?
Well, I think just want to try to see what we can do to improve the community outreach, I guess you could say. Bring more opportunity and activities to the city, trying to help it grow a little bit. Obviously, with Robinson being more of a veteran community for Waco for the past forever, you've got to find ways to draw more people that want to move to Robinson. I just think it'd be good to see more things available to our current member of the community, and especially like kids with sports and everything like that. Seeing what we do.
The board will meet at least once every 3 months. Does that work in your schedule? No conflicts?
Yes,
For the most part. Obviously, things come up. What do you envision for the future of the city of Robinson?
Well, I think what I'd like to see is ultimately a bigger complex, I guess you could say, something with obviously sports fields, maybe like an outdoor walking track, maybe a fishing pond for fishing, a bike trail, something like that. Something we can actually offer back to citizens of Robinson that they can actually get involved in being outdoors and a little bit more community involvement.
Okay. And the last question for me, you'll be required to attend orientation, open meetings, training. Is that all good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Okay, guys, it's all yours. Anybody got any questions?
I just want to commend you for these volunteers.
Absolutely.
That's the hardest thing to do, to get volunteers to actually serve on boards and to stay.
Oh, no, trust me.
It's great to come to one or two meetings, but when they start to get discouraged and not show up, that makes it difficult.
Yeah, retention is a very difficult thing to come to.
Especially on this side.
But yeah, we deal with that quite a bit. Yeah, and we got a main stage. She's on the board with me, so we have a main stage, but we always have turnover. It seems like every other year.
Anybody else? No? All good? All good? Well, that was easy.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate that.
Thanks, sir.
All right. Nice to meet you.
You as well, sir. Nice to see you, sir. Thank you.
See you later.
Yep. Bill.
Robin? Come on up and have a seat. All right, I'll ask you the same 5 questions, and then we'll kind of move along as we go. So, number 1, are you a property owner, Robinson?
Absolutely.
All right. And why are you interested in serving on the Parks and Rec?
On my application, I said that I had served on the Woodway Parks and Recreation Board and actually chaired it before we sold our home in Woodway, and it sold really quickly, and so I had to leave pretty abruptly, and I hated that. But I've stayed in contact with those board members and the city council and so forth. A lot of our board moved up to the city council.
Oh, wow.
So it was a fun experience. We refurbished the parks. I was on the strategic planning at the family center over there and got that up and going. It was fun to see it come to fruition.
Okay. And number 2 is time commitment. Board meets once every 3 months. Sure, that's not a problem. What do you envision for the future of Robinson?
I was thinking about it, and I would, Waco or somebody around in Waco needs to build one of those select sport complexes. I think it would be a draw to our community. If be financial incentives for the city and, a lot of visitors. And I think Wyndham needs one of those. My granddaughter was in a select soccer team, and so we traveled all over with her and seen some really nice complexes. I think it would be a great addition for our community. I also envision, kind of a venue that could also bring revenue to the city. I grew up in Robinson, spent my heyday at Handball Park, great memories. I think our community, we pour into our kids, we're very family oriented, and offering them the best that there is. I think there's a need for senior citizens activities, a place that they can go. So, maybe that's a community center here. But looking at it, maybe, adult softball leagues. That would be fun. Pickleball courts would be great. So, a lot of, I'm a big visionary.
A lot of good ideas. Last one for me is there's obviously training and orientation, time constraint. You good with that? Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
I have one. And this is to dispel any thoughts that these folks have. You and I have never met before.
Right, yeah, right.
Never met
We
since.
were all thinking that.
I'm the superintendent of Kansas, so your hard work over there is now
Wait, so this is somebody that you didn't know? I've never met anybody that Jimmy didn't know. This is crazy.
only person in Central
Texas.
Yes.
And then she mentioned, sports complex. And all
I
that. They
know.
I've
That's
heard of
exactly,
this.
yep.
They know I did this. Well, I don't have any,
Shared notes.
real big questions. I'm obviously familiar with, your work at Woodway, what they've done, and, I think if your vision is to bring stuff like that to Robinson, then I'm in line.
Awesome. I brought up pickleball courts when I chaired the committee in Woodway, and this was, oh gosh, 2017. And everybody looked at me like I had a third eye. They never heard of pickleball.
You knew.
And
started
I
it.
was
Yeah.
like, okay, we'll table it and talk about it later.
That's pretty cool.
Taking over the regular task force.
Yeah, in the Olympics.
Does anybody play regular tennis?
My son still. He's still not a. He's like he wants to bang hard. He doesn't want to. Yeah. And his sister's trying to get him on that.
People in their
Pickleball.
50s and 60s, that's a big activity for them. And we have a, I don't know, I feel like we have a lot of those citizens in our community.
Have you been to anything since then?
No,
You come
I
up,
haven't.
no.
Remember Jimmy?
We'll walk you around and show you.
Now, has it been decided what's gonna happen with the Olive?
My
Because
fingers are
I know in the
crossed.
planning stages, we were gonna razz it, and we were gonna offer senior activities at the new center, so.
Yeah, that discussion, hopefully there'll be a presentation in April, with Parks and Rec, and then that's it. Okay.
All right. Good. All right. Thank you for your time.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much.
Appreciate you very much.
Thanks.
All right. There's a lot of stuff on here tonight. But we're not gonna dwell on a whole lot right here. So next, the quarterly investment report. Craig, did you wanna talk about that now and later, or you wanna just wait and do it?
Anybody has any questions about it? I know we do it during the meeting and we kind of go over it real quick and if there's anything there, anybody have any questions?
I'm gonna jump to one, just the verbiage in the opening on the opinion. Does it always say fair, present fairly?
No,
Oh.
you're looking at the financial audit.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm on
One
the
ahead.
next one. I'm excited. Can't wait.
I know where you're going because I got that question answered today, but you're gonna get to ask it. Okay, so anybody got anything, we'll just let him, everybody good, just let him do that then? Okay, now, ask your question.
So the verbiage on the opinion stated something, it presented fairly, is that the common verbiage, or that's considered the clean?
That's the best.
Clean opinion, yes,
Yeah,
okay,
yes.
so let's make sure. It's always somewhat ambiguous, that verbiage. It's like, it's so understated that it's.
It's if it says, in our opinion, the company's financial statement presents fairly in all material respects to reflect the financial position. If it doesn't say that, or it says that, and then at the end it says except.
Then you have, so
This
that
is
verbiage is a
standard,
clean
right?
opinion,
This
the
is
clean
standard
person.
opinion. That's, you'll see that almost verbatim in every, not just governmental art, but any type of art, considered unqualified.
Yeah, that's the term, unqualified. I mean, that in itself, when you know, someone unfamiliar with that reads unqualified opinion. Doesn't say like, oh, that's a good thing, right? Doesn't speak very good.
Does anybody else have a question because they read ahead? Otherwise, we wait for them to give their synopsis and then you can ask a question. Everybody good? Good. We're gonna get a presentation discussion on the citizen survey.
That was so low.
That was,
One or two surprises.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is just my evaluation of what I read and what I saw. I was not at all surprised at the fact the roads are number one on the dislike list. I was surprised at the lack of response in favor of a sports complex. I expected to have a lot more people expand on why they wanted it, but nobody did. It was one of the lowest ranked items on the final evaluation. I really expected more people to say, we need a sports complex, and they weren't there. There wasn't any positive response to that.
I read that report differently.
Maybe I just looked at it differently.
I didn't say that, I wouldn't say that, I don't know, I didn't get that vibe. Was it the number one item? No. Was it a top three, top five? It was consistently up there.
Maybe I didn't read it correctly, because my old eyes don't look the
So
same.
that's one of the reasons I wanted, this to come back to us, because if you read it, and if you remember the presentation last year, they were able to expand on how to read it, because there is a lot
Yeah,
of
right.
it. And there's
Way more
some
data than
nuances to
the
it.
audit. Manual audit had more data than the audit.
So I'm looking at it also differently too, like, I think you're right, for us to look at this and Donnie or Greg being the city folks on it, kind of work some of that stuff. I'll be interested when we do the survey to kind of see where trends, trends change there, and certainly in the substantial. I think that would be good.
Yeah, and this is the last version. Late 22, late 23, they reported on 23.
But the nuances, even like on streets and the other things that they were asking for, that were consistently popping up, you know, a report is only as good as how you understand it, and there are ways to take information in quick and read something in it that's not there. So that's why I wanted the presentation, because I can read all day long a lot. And I can come up with some ideas and some thoughts on it. Am I on the right track here, or I do distinctly remember from the presentation, I'm like, okay, I didn't get my with how they just phrased it there. Of course, the business of the survey,
Yeah.
bring it to light, that maybe I would do it too.
So it'll be online discussion.
Yeah, it'll be online. Perfect.
all right, anybody have any issues with the minutes from the last two meetings, since there were two since then? Okay.
Yes, sir.
And then we are to approve a resolution authorizing the continued participation with the steering committee by Atmos. And if y'all remember, a couple weeks ago, we did this same thing for the Encore Electric Company. You want to expand on that? Because we're going to put this on the
Yeah, it's
consent.
basically the same thing. It's representing all the cities that service from Atmos. this is what I'm talking about, they always do, they send one month and one the other, but they always want the one, first one due before we get the second one. But, it's basically the same thing, it's, with the cities, this is negotiated power with that, no kind of rate increase. Continue participation in that. Their per capita fee did not go up, but our population increased, so the overall cost goes up a little bit.
And everybody okay, that kinda got put on the consent agenda anyway, so everybody's good with that? All right, the next thing is something that is brought back that y'all had before I got here, quite lengthy, where we deleted in its entirety Appendix A zoning, Article 11 supplementary district regulations section, and then redid the site development, new exhibit. Did everybody read that again? I mean, they sent it to me to read. It's quite
It's
quite the,
even if you read every page and understand every word,
yeah.
how does it apply?
That's, yeah, if someone could come up with the Cliff Notes,
David's like, I know.
Cliff Notes,
That's
Explain
right.
everything in
Yeah.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
Your
Look at him.
entire
can't
word
wait to get out
dictionary
there.
of knowledge.
Give them the mic.
I've memorized it.
if you had the Cliff Notes,
Yeah.
how would you give us the Cliff Notes to take a test?
Okay. All this does is the section 1111, it eliminates that, brings those over to a new code chapter and expands upon how to do the site development process.
So is it basically it's basically for the industrial and
It's-
development, like housing development, no?
No, it exempts single-family uses on a piece of land, duplex, and agricultural uses. So any other uses have to potentially go through the site development process.
Okay.
You already have that in section 1111 of the zoning code, but this just breaks down to another chapter which expands upon certain things that we need, like how to do the application process, exemptions, traffic impact analysis, things that are needed from a city standpoint that most other cities have that we're missing in our development process.
So this corrects that and gets us kind of in the same as everybody else?
Yep.
Our rules and regulations, I assume, are pretty same standard with other people's,
Yes.
how we do things?
Cities that are experiencing growth, they'll be in line with those cities.
Okay.
Does this, chapter 26 include like an app to develop, is a process like that, or does it have to apply to get the permits? I mean, not like apply, but other cities that you have to get an app to develop, then that goes in front of council, and then from there, they're allowed to, start applying for permits, but they can't even apply for permits until they have the app to develop.
This just basically says, hey, you've got to go through this process if you do certain things. Our current code says that, but it's not in the level of detail that we need.
Same
So-
steps, just
Same,
work it out better.
almost the same steps, but in more detail.
Any additional steps or any omitted steps from the process?
But we don't have exemptions in our code, how to do from the site development plan. We don't have processes that explain what's my review times, what do we need. We don't have a very expanded list of what we need, where we need to be at, for what you submit with the application. We don't have a traffic impact analysis requirement. We don't have any of those things. This just brings those standards in.
And that, it says traffic impact analysis, that would be something that we had voted on, the development thing,
Yeah, we did that because we were planning to
plan development, but this would add that to any development.
Is it everything or just for certain?
It's all development that's not single family on a lot, duplex on a lot, or agricultural related
But does
uses
the
on a
TI,
lot.
would kick in for everything, or is there?
It would kick in for, the TI would kick in if you're generating more than 100 or more AM or PM peak hour trips for your development. So you on the,
Don't know if I read that.
what you'll do is on the,
100 more people in the morning and 100 more people.
I'm gonna go ahead and tell you I did not. I got about halfway through and went, I'm done, yeah.
That means 100 more vehicles or more are gonna be on the road in the morning and in the afternoon as a result of the development. The development is gonna increase the traffic loads. AM morning traffic is
40
What
to
was the
50
slang
home
you just
development,
used for
is
that?
that,
I'm sorry. Go. What it is basically, if they generate a certain number of trips based on the analysis of the land uses they want to do, they have to mitigate for their impacts to the roadway systems. Whether that's fees in lieu or physical improvements to a road system, that'll be determined as part of the TIA
And that
analysis.
I like, because we hear that, from neighbors who are submitting letters of opposition regarding development coming to their area, and one of the kickbacks is always the traffic impact. And this is the answer to that problem, or at least the analysis to figure out what needs to change it anyway.
Right. And it allows flexibility too. It not only does it allow exemptions from the TIA, but if they don't want to do a TIA, let's say we know the full impacts to the road system, it's one, we can enter into a development agreement with them. The council, of course, would approve that development agreement that mitigate for the impacts to the system.
It
So-
gives teeth to not just, hey, I'm requiring you to do a study like we did last time, it actually gives teeth to the study.
Correct. So in other words, if they don't want to do the TIA study, we know we're impacting one system, all the traffic's going to that, and it's a big impact. We can sit here and say, okay, we understand you're going to do the TIA, let's enter into a development agreement that explains what you're impacting, what you're going to improve, what fees you're going to pay to mitigate for those impacts. You would approve that as council as part of the development agreement, independent of the traffic impact analysis. That gives additional flexibility as well.
I like that part.
And it gets into cool terms like vehicle miles traveled, all that sort of thing that you can base it off of in the code requirements.
Okay. So,
Add more, but,
what, keep on going, I'm good.
so what else is there? Like, I mean, the exemptions that it provides for you as a staff.
Exemptions are if it's single-family duplex or agricultural uses on a lot, we don't trigger it. If they're doing certain improvements to a building, it won't trip it. If the building's destroyed by an act of God, war, tornado, etc., they can build everything back, put the same uses in place, as long as it's not more than 1 year since it was destroyed. It allows for, if it's a small enough project, we may not trip a TIA, site development requirement, we may put it through the building permit process. So it allows flexibility there.
So like if somebody redoing a business or tearing down a couple of businesses here, it's not that huge, obviously access to 77, just put it to the vendor.
Right. So if they have to add 4 parking spaces for the new use, we probably run through a building permit process versus the site development process. That kind of flexibility.
Sounds like you thought of everything.
I think we just got quick notes version, but it's really easy. I think
Thank
we-
you.
Well, after looking at it like 3 times, I was looking for a real quick note. I mean, your eyes started crossing about page 10.
Try writing this.
Yeah, no, I'm out.
And the hope for this is, we have the old ordinance, and then there's also requirements within the subdivision ordinance and things for infrastructure and all that. So it's try to pull it all into one plan submitted that addresses everything related to the site. And then building comes on top of it.
Yep.
So this is everything you have to do to prepare your site for this.
Is there anything in this that would cause confirmation or pushback from developers? Most of it probably, but like,
If it doesn't, he didn't do his job, right?
but the thought is there anything in there that is gonna stand out that we can expect to hear from somebody?
Somebody doesn't want to do the traffic impact analysis or the development agreement to mitigate for the impacts, it's the cost of doing all that.
Does anybody else have any questions for him?
I don't think so. So I think it's gonna be like all the other updates that you've done, so we get into it, we'll start in that to it. And then we'll see what, really is significant.
Well, and some of this will lead into discussions that one would probably have, the development comes along. Because of the impact they're doing, we can't make it necessarily redo an entire road, because, there has to be, what's the term?
Right.
kick it off, but where does the money come to pay for it? That's part of the thing. So that's kind of like, it kind of becomes almost in lieu of a road impact fee, doing it that way. The road impact fees are really, really hard to do, I guess.
It's a big detailed study to do them and that sort of thing, but.
So it's a way to let the new businesses who come in and create more traffic help. But that's not the road. Many years ago, you used to be able to just say, you gotta redo the road, but then they started suing us all. Of course, came in and said, no, you can't do it. Fix the road for everybody, you can't make them fix the road for their portion.
There has to be a level of proportionality of impacts that they address, not impacts beyond what they do.
They're only increasing it to 15%, long as they
The road might be better.
So to, I guess, get this resolved and get it where it's in force, since it's been hanging out there a while, is everybody in favor of, so, could we put that on the consent if everybody's in favor of?
For discussion tonight.
This was a discussion.
We would have to bring it back, have a public
Oh, okay,
hearing on
all right,
it.
so we'll make sure we're doing what we need to get him what he needs.
If y'all are comfortable, we can.
Yeah,
March 18th.
Mark it.
okay, that's good.
The Mark County.
Mark your calendars for March 18th.
We'll see this for this.
I have to follow these unique state requirements I'm subtracting from the zoning code, so I have to notice it and all that.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan, for your Cliff Note version. That was very well done.
Thank you.
We have about 2 minutes left. I'll just say that the last thing is we're not gonna have a discussion tonight about streets. Craig's gonna have a discussion, a presentation about streets. And then we're all gonna have when we get through, we're gonna have this look on our face, and then we'll have something to talk about for a while. So, with that, I'm going to adjourn the work session at 6:27, and we'll trade places.
Thank y'all. My name's John Manning, and I'm with Patillo Brown and Hill, and we're here to present the results of the September 30th, 2024 audit report for the city of Robinson. And you have 3 documents. I'll kind of go over a little bit of all of them. We're going to start with the actual financial statements, which is the bigger of the 3. This is where we spent the lion's share of our time. I'm not going to go over every page, so when I say open to page 1, I don't want to see any faces. But if you look at page 1, this is really why we were here. The numbers are the responsibility of the city. Our responsibility is to express an opinion on those numbers as presented to us. And so that's what we have here in this independent auditors report. If you look in that first paragraph there, the opinion section, we're able to offer an unmodified opinion for the city's financial statements, which of the 4 types of opinions that we can offer, this is what we would call the best. It means we did not have to modify our opinion for things that the city was not keeping track of. We have some really small places that don't keep track of capital assets or roads or any of that stuff. And so we have to modify their opinion to show financial statement users that they didn't keep up with that. We didn't have that here. And although this is only a 3-page document, you know, when you go out for bonds, this is a huge feather in the cap of the city to have an unmodified opinion. When you get your grants, they want to make sure that when they're giving you grant money, that's going to the right things, being spent properly, that there's a set of internal controls that work. So this is a big deal. And the other thing is, although we work primarily with Karen and her team, really the independent auditors report is a citywide effort. I mean, you can have all the policies and procedures that you can write up. If no one does them, they don't work. So the time that y'all take to put controls in, to have checks and balances, the people that are out there doing the work, they're doing them. And we were at water, we were at, finance, we're at permits, we're looking at everything. So everybody there did a super job, and we were very happy with how things turned out. If you'll look at page 4, this is put in several years ago. It's for people that don't do what I do all day and look at financials. It's kind of a narrative format of what happened during the year. I really like looking at this because if you look over on page 6, you can actually see this year versus last year, and it's very helpful. So you can see some of the things that, if you'll remember, y'all did in FY24, you can see them show up in the numbers. For instance, if you look over on page 6 at that table there, you look at 24 versus 23, you can see a large increase in current assets, and that's because of the proceeds from the bonds that y'all issued are still predominantly in cash and waiting to be spent on projects. So that was the increase there in current assets. And flip side of that is, you can see in the liability section that those numbers increased as well. So those were 2 big transactions that happened during the year in both governmental and water sewer. You can also look over on page 7, and there's a summary of your income statement there. But I'm going to go over those in a little bit more detail in a manner that people here are used to looking at them. So if you'll look at page 13, this is a balance sheet. So this is all the assets and liabilities of the city as of September 30th, 2024. Remember, this is just one day. The income statement is 12 months. So when I look at these balance sheets, remember, it's a snapshot of one day. But if you look, when we do our audit procedures, we look at what we call audit risk, where we look and see what's the chance of this number being really wrong. And so that's how we kind of go through and develop an audit plan. And when you really look at what the city has, we have a little over $21 million of total assets in your governmental funds, and $5 million is cash, 2.8 is local pools, and then you have about 12.8 in restricted cash, which is those bond proceeds. All of those dollars are 100% confirmed outside the city. So it's not like we just go to Karen and she sends a bank statement and says, oh, here's how much money we have. We actually get a report, send it to the bank, they send it back to us without the city being involved, to therefore prove that that cash is actually there, belongs to the city. Then we can take those balances and test the bank reconciliations and make sure that cash is correct. And one of the reasons that we do so much on cash is that's of assets that you have that can walk away. That's pretty much the easiest one to do. It's hard to steal a road or a water meter, but anyway. The reason that we look at that is just to give you some guidance and some updates that a lot of your balance sheet don't have a lot of risk. They're very easy to audit. Flip side is, if you go down to your liabilities, your accounts payable, predominantly that is a little under $800,000. The bulk of that is invoices for construction projects where the work was done before 9/30, but not paid for till after typical balance sheet account. And then if you look at that unearned revenue, that 2.1 million, that is still the leftover portion of the COVID money that you guys have yet to spend. So it's there properly listed as a liability. Once you spend it, it'll come off and be called revenue, and then that liability and cash will go away. So again, not a very complex balance sheet, and the finance department's attention to detail makes this extremely easy to get into this format. So if you look at page 16 and 17, like I said, that was just your assets and liabilities as of one day. This is an accumulation of 12 months of revenues and expenses. And you can see that the city, for your governmental funds, closed out revenues of a little over 12.2 million, with obviously the bigger part of that is your property tax collections, and then those continue to grow. And then also your sales tax revenues, which ended up a little over 2.6 million. And then the other things, are just customary. You did have some hotel occupancy tax for the first time this year. Some of that came in. But really the other big part is if you look at that intergovernmental, that's about 1.3 million. That is the 1.354 million of the COVID money that you guys spent during FY24. So remember, I said it was a liability on the balance sheet. That's the portion this year that you spent. So we took it out of liabilities and called it revenue. There's also a summary of your expenditures there midway through the page. And then here you can also go down a little bit closer to the bottom under other financing sources, and you see that 9.2 million of issuance of bonds. That's where those funds came in FY24, and you can see it in that capital projects fund, and you'll just see as you spend that money, that cash will go away, and then your capital assets will increase. So you're just going to flip that from cash to capital assets. So again, we were able to confirm that new bond. The entries for that look great. And if you look, one of the things that we always like to look for is how is your fund balance trending. And y'all ended with a little under 6.9 million, at 6.869. Had a little over $500,000 increase to fund balance during this year, which is great. GFOA recommends a minimum of 4 months, and y'all are above that. So I don't want any part of getting it too low, just because no one ever thought we'd have a pandemic. No one ever thought we'd have a lot of things that have happened. And having some fund balance there is a way to have some financial stability in case something unexpected happens. Debt service fund, a little over 200,000 of funds there, and obviously the capital projects increased greatly with the issuance of those capital projects. Your other governmental funds over here are a lot of the TERS, the smaller governmental funds that are required to be presented in the back, and those all looked good as well. Really the last financial statement that I'd like to look at is on page 19 and 20. So that's governmental. That's all streets, law enforcement, administration. And then this is your proprietary fund, which is water sewer operations. And again, that added about $1.7 million to fund balance there. That fund balance obviously is a lot higher. It's about 32 million. But you have to remember here we include all the capital assets that you guys have. So that number's going to be a big number. And if you look up there, it's about 17.5 million of, 36 million of capital assets there. So again, what we did here is we looked at bills at year end, followed through and made sure that they got collected after. We tested your rates, we sampled water bills, we sampled collections, and nothing came back out of the ordinary. Everything looked really good. And again, I think if you're looking at this set of financial statements, obviously there's no findings and there's no, you have an unmodified opinion. But I think it also speaks to financial stability that you guys are able to, if something unexpected happens to a certain degree, depending on what it is, you'll be able to weather that. And I know that periodically y'all have to go out for ratings calls and people look at y'all's financials to see, how can we rate these guys? What kind of interest rate can we give them? And I really think that this report points to the city as being a place that is in really good financial shape. The other thing that I have is this other bound report. You have these sometimes, but this is something that we have to do every year. But as I mentioned earlier, because you guys spent some of that COVID money, if you spend over $750,000, we have to do extra work in addition to the regular audit work that we do. So you had about $862,000 of federal funds that you guys spent, So what we did is we actually have to go through and look at every expenditure that you guys did for COVID or for the ARPA money, sample it, and make sure that it was A, allowable, that you did it on time, that you filed the right reports. And I mean, it's pretty strenuous, the amount of things that we have to do with those federal funds. I mean, they're great to have, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into making sure you spend them right and that you don't get into trouble with regulators as far as what you're doing with that. And the one good thing about this is it's pretty open to what you can do, and everything that we pulled looked in order and was spent on things that were allowable. And because of the way the records were being kept, we did not have any what we call significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, meaning we didn't see reports that weren't filed on time. We didn't see reports that weren't financially correct. So all in all, the grant stuff, which is very important to make sure that it's correct, was in very good working order. So again, we wouldn't be here without the help of the finance department, Karen and her team, making sure that we get everything. I don't know if y'all have ever looked at our items needed list, but it's a lot. And she puts it up into Engagement Organizer. She has questions. She always calls us to try and make sure that if it's an unusual transaction, she wants our advice or some guidance on how to do those. But again, you know, everything was handed to us on time. I think we're here a month earlier than last year. Part of that's because this is the second year we did it instead of the first. The first year audits are always hard because we have to build out all of our work papers out from scratch. So being able to not have to do every work paper from zero helped a lot. We were able to look at a lot more things this year, and everything was in very good order. And just appreciate all the help from the finance team all the way to everybody that we did. You know, we met with 10 or 12 people about fraud control reviews. We did internal control reviews. We walked through different transactions. So we dealt with a lot of people throughout the city, and they were all extremely helpful, and we always appreciate their help. And I realize it's a thick document, and if you guys have questions, I'm glad to entertain those. As long as you want me to answer questions, I'll be here. That's what we're here for.
I don't know.
Did you note any at all deficiencies, or do you have any recommendations that we could probably process better?
No, I mean, like I was saying, the bank reconciliations, all the processes that are really key to making sure that your financials are in good order, they're being done correctly and they're being done on time. And we kind of get to where once we see that what we have is working, we kind of say, okay, let's move on to the next thing, where there are some things where you can do different kinds of engagements where there's like an operational audit where they may look and say, hey, you know, do we have too many people doing this, or is there a way that we can make this more efficient? We don't get into a lot of that just because of, you know, trying to get a 60-page report to you guys after a 9:30 year end, you know, needing a couple months to close out. There's not a lot of time to kind of dive in. But anytime we see, like, let's say, for instance, that one of those reports had some mathematical errors on it, especially with the federal stuff, it doesn't take a lot for us to have to mention it to y'all. Not that it's a huge deal, but we are required to say, hey, this report was filed in the name of the city and it was incorrect. And then we tell you what we call a corrective action, like what happened to make sure that it's not a problem still. We didn't have any of those.
I just want to make sure we put it in place, and with the position we're in, kind of further on down the line, something jumps up out of the ordinary.
Right, and obviously this is only our second year, but we've worked with the same team here at the city, and there is, complacency is not the word. And I know you're not saying that they are, but just to let you know, like, anytime you'll issue new debt, or if there's a transaction that's unusual, hey, we're selling this piece of equipment, or just anything, Karen always says, hey, I think I want to book it this way. Would you guys mind taking a look at it? Or she doesn't, and we're doing that in March. Instead of saving everything till the very end, and when we got to do the audit, oh, and here's all these other things that throughout the year that I'm not sure if they're correct or not. So just very proactive and wanting to try to get it done the right way, and that's all we can ask for.
I just want to clear and know that we don't doubt at all your expertise and experience. You do really appreciate the fact that you're never going to be able to retire.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council. Really appreciate the time.
We'd just like to doubly reiterate, thank Karen and everyone involved. That was a glowing report. Thank y'all. With that, we need to take a little action on that. Can I have a motion to accept? Go ahead, Jennifer.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor? Any opposed? Passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you guys.
Next, we have a presentation and discussion regarding the findings from recently conducted citizen survey. You want to do it? You want to flip it? No, you just go about it.
Hey, Destiny. I'm not sure if y'all can hear me, but I couldn't hear anything from your end, but I could still present. I'm going to present my...
You'll need to turn your mics on.
On. Oh, holy smokes. Then we can turn it back off. We'll need a mic.
Ryan, can you hear us? Ryan, can you hear us now?
I had the same issue on my Zoom call today.
Okay. Well, if you all are okay with it, I'd be happy to just go ahead and present, even though I wouldn't get any audio feedback from you all. I'd be happy to still go through the presentation. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I really apologize that I'm not able to hear y'all. I'm gonna drop my cell phone number in here too, and I guess if needed afterwards, please just let me know if we've got questions. And Destiny, feel free to follow up via email with any requests or anything like that. And we'll be sure to get all of that handled as soon as I possibly can here. But for now, I'll go ahead and just kind of jump into the presentation. Just a little bit about ETC Institute. I know there's a few members of the council who are new or who weren't there in January when I presented the results last year, but ETC Institute is really the nation's leader in market research for government organizations. We do this type of work nationwide, but we have a really strong presence in Texas as well as our local Kansas City metropolitan area. A couple other focus areas would be our North Carolina region as well as our Florida region, and we do a lot of work in those states. And so one of the things that you'll see through in my presentation and the reporting is a benchmark comparing your results to Texas averages. I've also compared you to national averages, which gives us that opportunity to kind of review where that difference lies there in Texas. And we know Texas can be very different or dramatically different in terms of their perceptions and their opinions on different topics. So we want to make sure that we're tracking some of that, and the best way to do that is through context. But really on this slide, I'd just like to let everybody know we've been doing this for more than 40 years. I've been with the firm for about 20 years. I've done anything and everything you could imagine at our firm. been here for a really long time, and we're happy to be here presenting again this evening. It seems like maybe we're getting back to, okay, I think I'm seeing somebody else's screen here, but are you all seeing my screen? I'll assume yes. Okay. Alrighty. So one of the things that I always like to do as the presenter or the consultant when we're presenting these types of results is really frame up the results from which we will review them, and really that's just the lens through which I interpret the results. And so one of the big things here is to kind of just note that you all are Robinson residents, you're very familiar with the issues at hand, and you all have a completely different reason or perspective as to why we're doing this or how to interpret the results. And I'm the consultant. I'm a guy from Kansas. I've seen survey results for 20 years. I've traveled all over Texas presenting results, and so I've just got a little bit of a unique lens. And on top of that, and I'm not sure if Destiny knows this, but I'm also a city council member in my own city. And so we've got about 6,500 people. So in addition to some of that unique perspective, I've also got that perspective of what it feels like to sit on the other side of this desk. And really, I like to let you all know that when I review the results or interpret the results, this is really an objective feedback tool. And so what we want to do is understand objectively how residents think, feel, and perceive the delivery of city services. And so while we want to make sure that we're cognizant or we're staying in touch with residents, we know that they're not subject matter experts on every service that we've provided. We also know not everybody who's got an opinion on every service we provide or asked them to rate in the survey has a first-hand account with that service. And so some of this is really just the way that people felt and the way that people think about your services. But the reason that we make sure that we have those contextual comparisons is to compare your performance to nationwide and statewide or local averages. And that really helps balance kind of the whole scale there. While we're objectively asking residents to assess the delivery of these services, the comparisons across larger sample size or benchmarking surveys could give us a true understanding of kind of where our residents sit compared to others. Are we in line or are we out of line with some of those other regional or national averages? One of the other big things that we work on when we work with clients is that we develop the survey with determining priorities in mind. And so we design the survey inherently to push out our important satisfaction analysis or opportunities for improvement is how we usually discuss that. And what that analysis does is assesses both satisfaction as well as importance or emphasis being placed on those service level items. And what we're going to do basically from there is say, hey, if we're able to improve or increase satisfaction with the items towards the top of this analysis, we should have a pretty good handle on improving satisfaction generally with the variety of city services we offer, but also some of our perception related items that we'll see really to start the presentation here. It's important to note from the lens in which I've reviewed the results, but also it's really important to understand the way that we've done things. And we've been doing them for a really long time. It's a statistically rigorous, statistically valid survey methodology. And basically what we did is we first designed the survey, the first one conducted for the community by ETC Institute, that was administered toward the end of 2023 and presented initially in January of 24. We designed that survey, like I mentioned, we designed it specifically to include some of those design features, but also some of those benchmarking questions, as well as a few unique questions for the community, specific to Robinson. We then mail that survey to a random sample of households within the city's limits, and each survey online took about 17 to 20 minutes to complete. Most surveys in this range take about 15 minutes to complete, a little bit longer in terms of overall rate or length of how long the survey took to complete. Now, one of the things that we've really done over the last year and a half here is really try to shorten overall surveys, and we are seeing more surveys coming back down to about that 15-minute length. When we go for a sample size, or when we talk about sample size, what we're really trying to do is make sure that we're meeting a threshold that puts us at a specific margin of error. And what we want that margin of error to be is about as close to 5% as we can get, if not a little bit under. The overall sample size is really kind of a cost factor, though. And so what ETC Institute wants to do is maximize your investment in our services, and we do sample sizes of 300 completed surveys nationwide for communities that are much larger than Robinson and communities that are smaller than Robinson. And so it's a really sufficient sample size to get us right about at a 5% margin of error. And so we were set out to complete 300 completed surveys. We got 305. gives us a margin of error of about 5.5%, or about 5.4% at the 95% level of confidence. And what that means is if we were to have asked the question in this survey that was a yes/no question, and 50% of people said yes and 50% said no, 95 out of 100 times that we go and randomly sample the community, collect 305 completed surveys from randomly selected respondents, we should get that 50-50 breakdown as high as about 55%, or as low as about 45% in either the yes or no category. And so we know that the results are reliable because we captured a randomized sample of opinions from a representative sample of respondents. And so the representation is just as important as the way that we do things. So I need to make sure that things are randomized across the community, that every single residential address within the city's limit has an equal opportunity of being selected to receive the mailed survey, that we robustly follow up with the community, and then that we track geographic and demographic composition of the survey sample. And so what we want to make sure that we're doing here is distributing the surveys across the city as best as possible. And what we're doing with the demographic comparisons is that we're trying to make sure that we're comparing those to your Census Bureau statistics to ensure that we've got accurate sampling or accurate demographic composition, which we did achieve in the 2023-2024 survey. Now, I don't typically display all of those results. Those charts are rather cumbersome. They're all in the reporting. We can definitely have that discussion. We can create some comparisons comparing you directly to the census tables. But if you were to look up the most recently available census statistics that were available in January of 24, that's what we would have matched your or aligned your census statistics to. And so we're again trying to get within that margin of error for items like race, ethnicity, age, gender, and those other demographic questions that we ask in the survey. So to jump into the results, the first thing that we want to talk about typically is perceptions. And so perceptions are one of those areas to kind of break the ice with the survey results. But again, it really helps kind of clear the picture or really fill out that picture of we're assessing things that aren't necessarily always services, and we're assessing things for which not all residents have a firsthand opinion, nor are they subject matter experts on. For example, overall feeling of safety in the city. In the eye of the beholder, very much so, but overall perceptions are really strong in the community. Almost 80%, a little close or a little bit off of 80% of residents indicated that they're either excellent or good when it comes to rating the overall feeling of the safety in the city. When we talk about overall quality of life, overall quality of services provided by the city, there are two more areas where 50% or more of respondents indicated that you're doing an excellent or good job at that. There are always going to be detractors within the communities. We're always going to have some below average poor ratings, and some charts will see dissatisfied, very dissatisfied charts. A lot of those items are very difficult because sometimes, again, it's eye of the beholder. But what we'll see is availability of affordable housing, which has been a common issue, something that's been asked a lot over the last year or so in Texas. A lot of communities are struggling mightily with that particular option or item. And the other item that most communities are struggling with nationally over the course of that election year was the overall value received for your city tax dollars and fees. Now, at ETC Institute, we've noticed trends with the presidential elections over the last 3 or 4 cycles where items like taxes, affordable housing, overall feeling of safety can be mightily impacted by the discourse or the overall rhetoric of some of those discussions. But back in 2023, coming into 2024, the city performed very well in key areas related to our perceptions of our community. We also rate the overall quality of city services. And while we changed the rating from excellent, good to very satisfied to very dissatisfied, it's essentially the same idea. We're asking to and understand which services do you think are being delivered at a higher quality or a lower quality. Now, when residents are dissatisfied or upset with a particular service or apply a lot of emphasis to that service, you can find items like the maintenance of city streets and sidewalks that had a vast majority of folks tell us that they're either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with that item. One of the things that we should always keep in mind is that while that's a core service, it's a really expensive item that cities just continually pour money into and kind of have a maintenance cycle across your community most often. What I really want to point out are the items towards the top of this list that are core to quality of life. Even if we had dirt roads or gravel roads, we would be more concerned about police services, making sure our trash is picked up, our quality of parks and recreation services, Wastewater, it's really important when the water doesn't drain down anymore. And then customer service provided by city employees is up there in that top 5 as well. And those are going to be one of those items that really pushes brand loyalty forward. If your customers call and they're satisfied with the quality of service provided by your employees, they're going to be generally satisfied with some of our perception related items. What I've done with the arrows is highlighted the items that were determined to be high priorities based on our important satisfaction analysis. Those are items such as traffic flow, maintenance of our streets, stormwater runoff, enforcement of codes, and water services. Water service is frequently an item where folks are either upset with billing issues or rate increases, and could be difficulties for municipalities who run those enterprise services. We talk about management of stormwater runoff and flood prevention. If you have a single bad item, or if there's a particular area of town where that issue can be difficult, it can really kind of bubble up in surveys like this. But we want to make sure that we're assessing satisfaction, and later on when we go to the important satisfaction analysis, I'll show you some of the emphasis ratings on these items too. But I really wanted to set the stage for us to kind of point out a few of these services that are of the highest importance in our important satisfaction analysis, really pushing us to consider those services for priority increases versus some of our other areas such as communication or wastewater, where we're performing relatively strong still. I talked about benchmarks to start. You performed very well compared to national and regional averages. You had about 44 questions that were directly comparable to our databases. Our U.S. average is based on a really large sample of about 10,000 respondents nationwide. The Texas average is based on about 800 residents nationwide. We do this every 2 years, so we're up for it again in 2025. So we'll have updated numbers this year, but we're still using 2023 summer numbers, just as you'll see here. I've highlighted the same 3 areas that are those key areas that I mentioned earlier: feeling of safety, quality of life, overall quality of services provided, performing above both the national and regional averages in all 3 of those areas. And in fact, you're performing above the Texas average and also the overall image of the city. And then we're much more along the average lines or slightly below in a couple of those areas, such as how well the city's managing development activity, which has been a very difficult issue for many municipalities to manage, especially communities that have well-established residents or families that have lived there for many years. I've got a local one that's putting a Panasonic battery plant in, and that is the #1 item, now their second survey in a row. They did theirs at the beginning of 23, and they just wrapped up their 25 survey. It's the top item. It's very difficult for city leaders because they know they need to continue to grow the city, but all of the established residents, the long-term residents that have been there, are very worried more than anything, it sounds like, based on the open-ended comments about that development activity. And that can always be an issue for smaller communities that are either trying to grow or exploring growth opportunities. We've already seen this chart, but with the overall satisfaction, and now we're looking at our overall quality or overall satisfaction with city services compared again to our regional and national averages. Performing very well in key areas such as traffic flow, water services. Management of stormwater, enforcement of city codes, and the maintenance of city streets and sidewalks were below average. But again, core services like police, trash and recycling, parks and wastewater, customer service, you're really setting the standard for the delivery both statewide and nationwide in many of those key areas, which is just really excellent to see. Again, high quality of life ratings are equated specifically to some of those core services towards the top. High performing organizations typically will see the maintenance of city streets and traffic flows high priorities for improvement. Codes and ordinances can be a very difficult item because, again, it's very much in the eye of the beholder. When we get to codes and ordinances, I'll have another little anecdote there, but we've worked on that a lot with municipalities across the country, and it's a very difficult item, even depending on the time of year from time to time. So when we talk about priorities for improvement, I've alluded to it now a few times. We've already seen the satisfaction numbers, and what we're looking at now is the overall emphasis placed on those items based on the forced ranking by respondents. And so what we asked respondents to do after they rated their satisfaction was to tell us which 3 services do you think should receive the most emphasis from city leaders over the next 2 years. And so our top 5 items are also the top 5 items that should receive the most emphasis. But because the maintenance of city streets and sidewalks was also the least satisfied and the most important, it's the item that's the highest opportunity for improvement, or the item that should have the greatest impact on the overall satisfaction with the delivery of city services moving forward. In your reporting, it looks slightly different than this, but I do like to start with the greens. The greens are the items for which, even if you made dramatic improvements in satisfaction with your municipal court services, which is an underutilized service by a majority of your community, it's unlikely to push overall satisfaction and your perception ratings. Same with parks, same with police services and wastewater services. You're performing very well in those areas, so they've received less of an emphasis rating from respondents. As we move up the list, we find city communication with the public, and as satisfaction could potentially dip slightly with that item, it could potentially become a high opportunity or a high priority for improvement. The items in red and the item at the top of this list are those areas that are going to have the most impact or the greatest impact on the largest number of respondents if we're to improve the overall satisfaction there. Some of those items received relatively high levels of satisfaction, like traffic flow. Other items, like enforcement of codes or management of stormwater runoff, could receive some impact based on an improvement or maybe a service level change to some of those areas. The enforcement of city codes and ordinances is very difficult because you might have a neighbor that you're living next to who you think needs to be enforced upon. So you'll call the city and say, hey, my neighbor needs to be enforced upon. City goes out and says, hey, that is not really breaking code, so we're not going to enforce. So now you've got a resident who's dissatisfied about what they think is maybe a derelict property next door. It's not technically out of code. The same could be said for if that property was out of code. Now, one resident's happy and the resident that's been enforced upon is no longer happy because they're out of code and they've got to do something to remedy the violation. And so that's a really difficult item. It's something that sometimes proactive code enforcement can work. That's a very expensive item. One of the things we've done here locally is begun postcards and really focusing on the time of year in which the most violations occur, or just sending out regular postcards to offenders. And it can really begin to kind of be that neighborly vibe that, hey, we've all received these postcards. I'm hoping that my neighbor's taking care of their things just as much as I should mine. And then you might see a little bit of movement on that particular item. That was that little anecdote that I mentioned earlier. I wanted to make sure I mentioned it's a very difficult item. It's not quite as straightforward as maintenance of city streets or maintenance of our stormwater or even our water or wastewater services could be. At the beginning of the presentation, I showed you a map with dots showing the location of survey respondents. And what we're showing now is the same map, but instead of showing the dots, what we've done is for each one of the services that you can read out to the right, this one for the maintenance of city streets and sidewalks, we've shaded the areas in those black boundaries based on the mean rating or the average rating within that area. If you remember back to the start, some of these census block groups or some of these boundaries didn't have as many surveys or as many dots in them as others, so this should always be taken with a grain of salt, but it can be an identifier to understand, hey, is there a particular area of town with a specific concern or issue? And when it comes to the maintenance of city streets and sidewalks, it does seem to be a community-wide consensus in terms of the overall rates of satisfaction. With the enforcement of city codes and ordinances, it's a very similar story where satisfaction is averaged out to neutral across the community, and same with the management of stormwater runoff and flood prevention. When we get to water services, which is one of our other top priorities for improvement, we find that it's really one corridor of the community, over there to the left, and neutral that seems to be the most dissatisfied, whereas the rest of the community seems to be relatively satisfied with that specific item. And the same could be said for traffic flow and congestion management, where the satisfaction rankings kind of move more satisfied as you move further east and further south in the community. The maps can be really helpful, particularly for city staff. In large communities, we do Dallas's survey. We shade these by their 14 city council districts. It could be helpful there as well. But sometimes this is an anecdotal exercise where we're just really finding out what maybe we already knew as staff. But it can also be helpful just to really understand, hey, this is the average opinion citywide, or hey, is this an isolated issue potentially in which there's a region that's pushing responses or pushing priorities here in the survey. In some of the other areas of the survey, we asked what some of the biggest issues the city might face over the next 5 years. Respondents doubled down on their insatisfaction and emphasis scores and indicated that road repair, maintenance, or expansion would be one of the biggest issues Robinson will face. This is a common issue in Texas, growth and development specifically. Infrastructure growth and development can be difficult. I was in Williamson County towards the end of last year, just north of Austin. Same thing. Repair, maintenance, expansion, the safety of those roadways and things like that were all major concerns for respondents moving forward in the county. But overall, these responses align very well with our overall importance, satisfaction, and ratings, which tells us that there was a reason why respondents took maybe a little bit longer to respond to the survey than average. They were thoughtful in their responses. They slowed down, they read each one of these response prompts, and they provided us responses that match some of the other priorities. If you remember in our important satisfaction analysis, we had really high police ratings. Crime is very much down here towards the bottom, while on some people's lists, not a major concern. Traffic congestion was also an area that was almost a high priority for improvement, but not as big of an issue for folks as road repair and maintenance. And so we're seeing some really good stuff here. We're also seeing controlling rapid growth above traffic and crime, which was one of those development opportunities that we saw larger levels of dissatisfaction with earlier. So overall, your respondents were really thoughtful in these responses. And at 25, we just asked generally how important are some general focus areas for you and your household. Again, they've doubled down once again, indicated infrastructure, and then they actually led on to know, hey, we know economic development is probably going to be an important focus for us or our household moving forward. It's going to be maybe a difficult conversation for elected leaders as well as city staff, but that is definitely clearly on residents' minds. And then we also had some code enforcement items, which is really great to see because folks are aligning some of these other areas, and instead of thinking to themselves, oh, this might benefit me most personally, it does seem like they're looking community-wide at some of these particular priorities, both in 24 as well as 25. And the reason that I say that about 24, going back one more time, is that not every household has a school-age child, and so school-related issues just doesn't impact overall, usually a majority of households in our communities. Now, it could be different in Robinson. I could be completely mistaken there, but most of the time, school-related issues don't impact all households. And then when we look here, we also see solve school pickup, drop-off, traffic issues, which that probably does impact everybody. But we also see some other stuff like developing a sports complex down there towards the bottom, about 34% of people saying it's very important or important to them. When we talk about communication, I always find that it's a key to future success. What's great about this one is that your staff are already in tune with communicating with the public. The city newsletter printed is one of those most used sources of information. Now, word of mouth in smaller communities is always going to be up there, but the best that we could do to keep a city-run source towards the top of this list is going to go a long way in your favor in communicating the way that you're going to tackle things and communicating issues related to improvements across the city, development or codes enforcement or otherwise. And we talk about customer service. I mentioned earlier some brand loyalty, but when we asked respondents, about 50% of which indicated they'd contacted you over the last year, we asked how satisfied they were with their most recent interaction, and over 60% indicated that they were either very satisfied or satisfied. Most folks calling you, some in person, but overall those numbers will go a long way to ensure brand loyalty, and it should continue to push your perception ratings. But overall, really hard thing to do. It's tough when you've got residents calling about issues within the city, and we know not all of them are calling just to provide compliments. Sometimes it's questions, oftentimes it's complaints. Your forward-facing staff deserve a huge pat on the back for these types of ratings to have such a vast majority of respondents say they were satisfied after getting off that phone call or visiting those folks. Just a couple of additional items. When we talk about the number and variety of places to live, work, and shop, would you like to see more about the same or fewer places in Robinson? We're seeing restaurant, coffee shop, bakery, public park, plaza, or open space, local entertainment establishments. There's quite a few items here that are getting a good portion of more ratings. And then there's a few down towards the bottom: townhouses, bars, liquor stores, traditional apartments, multifamily dwellings, and some of those vice areas, bars and liquor stores, kind of getting the brunt of the fewer responses, along with urban style mid-rise apartments, accessory dwelling units, and then along that alcohol lines, microbreweries or distilleries. And so we're seeing some clear-cut lines there about what folks would like to see more or less of. We have a good amount about the same, which means that you're doing a pretty good job there in terms of development of variety of items that you're bringing to the town. But there is kind of a clear sense from most respondents, we don't want to see any more bars, breweries, liquor stores, or multifamily developments. You all as subject matter experts on the town will have to make those decisions yourselves. But in summary, residents have a very positive perception of the city. What I always tell clients who've never done this with me before is that you never knew, you didn't know how people felt before you did the survey. Satisfaction in Robinson was much higher than in many than in other communities in many key areas. And that's really the point that I'm trying to make, is that it was key areas, key quality of life areas. Overall, you perform very well compared to benchmarking, but there are opportunities for improvement. So we know we're performing well or comparatively better than other communities across the state of Texas, but we did have some opportunities for improvement based on our important satisfaction analysis. And if we can focus on the additional analysis of the survey results by pulling out priorities that are important to respondents, not only in the IS analysis, but in some of those other questions like 24 and like 25, will help shape and feed, or at least nurture, some of those evolving needs of residents to ensure that your high ratings remain. We do suggest that you do a survey every few years. We know not every community can act quickly on the results. Some of my clients do this quarterly, some do it yearly. Usually most folks will do it every couple of years or every 3 or 4 years. I think Tyler, Texas, I'll be there in just a couple of weeks, does it every 4 years. And so we'll be back there here in just a little bit. So with that, I know the questions is going to be very difficult. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment and see if I can answer anything, but I apologize, I haven't heard anything yet.
I'm good. Yeah.
Okay.
I have questions, but we can.
But with the technical difficulty, it might be a little.
I could probably get with Craig on myself.
Okay. All right. Let's just tell him that we'll take his number, and no questions, and each individual person can reach out to him.
Thank him for his time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Council and Mayor. I hope you all have a great meeting. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Destiny, please contact me if there's any follow-ups that you have, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all. Have a great meeting. Thanks.
All right. Lots of good information. Next is the presentation on the quarterly investment report for December 31st, 2024.
Yeah,
I bet that Craig's got to get past the back and forth on the presentation over here.
Yeah, for some reason, my iPad is full and get locked out of Dropbox, and I have to go to the website to scroll through everything, so.
I've elected to just do that anyway for every meeting, just because the bigger the agenda, the harder it is on the iPad.
Yeah,
Mid-
especially
mid-scroll.
this was only 420 pages.
Only 4.
There's a light.
420.
Light reading.
Go on forever.
I may need a graph.
It does, but usually, like, if I'm scrolling through a bigger section of it, if I
Okay.
hit it right,
Okay, I got
it'll
it.
jump to the top.
Craig is up.
So this is, this is the quarterly investment report for the quarter that ended December 31st, 2024. The beginning book value and market value for the total investments was $44,820,198. The ending book value and market value for investments was $46,956,754. Let's see, the average quarterly yield was 4.55%. The rolling 3-month treasury is 4.56. The rolling 6-month is 4.63, and taxable is 4.56. So, since this is first quarter, this is also the year to date. So, and quarterly interest earnings for this period were $566,677. And I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions, concerns, comments?
I have none.
If none, is there a motion to accept the results for the quarter end?
I'll make a motion to accept the quarterly investment report for December 31st, 2024.
Someone second?
Second his motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. All right, next we have 2 items on the consent agenda. That would be to approve the minutes from February 4th, 2025 on the City Council regular workshop and regular meeting, and February 11th, 2025 City Council special workshop, and to approve Resolution 2025-003-R authorizing continued participation with the Steering Committee of Cities Served by Atmos. Do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda?
Motion to accept consent agenda items.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None.
So well worded.
And we are going to, for those that are following along, we are moving the executive session to the first item under the regular agenda. The executive session pursuant to the provision of the Texas Open Meetings Act, Chapter 551, Government Code Vernon's Texas Codes Annotated, in accordance with the authority contained in Section 551.071 to consult with the city attorney regarding the legal rights and responsibilities and possible litigation. With that, we will dismiss ourselves at 7:24 to executive session. anybody ever opened that, because they couldn't read what it said. All right, council returns from executive session at 7:46. And, now, I guess would someone like to make a motion? Or would y'all like me to say what we,
I'll just make a motion for authorizing Mike Dixon to move forward with any action on lawsuit for code enforcement against James Flores Senior.
okay, have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We do have one,
Yes.
she's saying,
I'm abstaining from voting. Okay, thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate it.
You need to sit around for a while.
oh, no, you're welcome to get off the clock.
Rounded up the hour, I know that.
Hey, you're welcome to get off the clock. It's all right.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, can somebody put him in a quick Uber?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, back to our agenda, item number 11 now. Action on the appointments to fill places 6 and 7. 5 and 7. Oh, okay, this says 6, I'd say 5. 5 and 7, we had 2 applicants that I thought were very good. So, does anybody have any discussion on those 2 individuals? Would anybody like to make a motion to put them in places 5 and
I'd
7?
make a motion, but I'm trying my best to get to this agenda item.
I can make a motion to appoint Zan Graver, for place 5 and Robin Oakes for place 7.
I'd second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Carry. Move on. Okay. So, on number 12, there's no action on that.
Not until March 18th.
Yeah, so do we just, no action and move
You
on?
don't have any more questions?
I was like, okay, so back on when we had David talking about the new code for building and such, did anybody else have any questions for him? Because this isn't an action item, it's just informational, so we had some questions. Anybody have anything else? Okay, so no action until, on number 12, until March 18th, when it's brought back up. All right,
Did we,
yes.
on agenda item 10, did we make a resolution approval for the Atmos?
Yeah, we did that in the consent
Yeah, we
agenda.
did.
when we-
Okay, that's what, I just wanted to make sure that we had covered that as well.
Yes,
Okay,
So thorough.
yes.
okay, thank you.
Well, it's always good to be, for sure. All right, and then we move to our favorite discussion, number 13. The most popular in the survey with everything and every, oh my. Okay, so Craig has gone through painstaking work, and we are going to listen intently, and we are not going to wear it out tonight, because we could, if we have
Now
enough,
you can see without glasses.
we can have enough questions to be here
Yes,
till
you can.
5 in the morning.
Yeah, get him his laser pointer.
Ah,
So I wanted to bring this, we've been talking about this and back and forth, and some of you were on the council, 3 of you were on the council. I think you were on the council when we first started in 18, talking about this when Clark Gower came in.
Oh,
We went
yes.
over a lot of this stuff and said, here's all the streets. And so this is kind of a rehash of what we've done and where we are, but my goal tonight is, I gave you a really big spreadsheet in the agenda. I'm sure you all saw that. I'm gonna try to help you make some reason of that, to understand what it is, so as you look at it and process it, because this is gonna take more than one discussion in one meeting to resolve. We talked a little bit about that in the site plan thing about, coming up with ways to pay for it, and that's always the, I thought it was interesting that number 1 on that survey is streets, and number 2 is high taxes. So,
Doesn't work?
looks like go hand in hand.
they're kind of opposing issues right there. So, but going back, we first kind of started on this journey in 2017 is really when we kind of kicked it off. We came up with a list of streets. We had some bond money left over from issues in 2013, 2015. Not as much as I'd hoped. We spent a lot of it on some chip seal projects, which I wish we hadn't, and we bought a bunch of vehicles with it that I wish we had, but we did, so we didn't get the full use of that. But we have a couple $1 million left over. Karen's already left. And so we started working with that, and then the council in 2019 agreed to do a bond issue with $8 million towards streets. We had a couple town hall meetings, people came, we talked about it. The consensus of the people attended was, we elect you, the city council, to figure that out. We don't need a bond election, you know. And so y'all issued that, and we started working. So in that process, we also looked at how we're maintaining streets. And the year I came here, the street department budget for maintenance street maintenance line item, which is not employees and everything, just materials, asphalt, chip seal, whatever, was $59,000. Was what they budgeted that year.
It was 40.
So we went
The year
back and
before.
looked at, what can we do to better maintain the streets we have, which is, again, more money. We're now up to $680,000 in the budget, I think is what you've got, maintenance, 670, 680. And that line item, that's probably about half what it really needs to be, but David's doing a good job of making it go as far as he can, so using that bond money, using the money in the budget, we've increased. This is just kind of overview, and in your packet, you actually have a breakdown of how many streets we've chip sealed and lists every street and all that, but just kind of a summary. So we've reconstructed, reclaimed with an asphalt overlay, 26 streets, which is 7.37 miles, and the total cost of that was just under $10.3 million to do those 26 streets. And most of those streets were the absolute worst streets that you were here back then and you drove on. In fact, the council, we went out, if you remember, with the engineers and met on Brewster, and we were all worried the neighbors were gonna come out and assault us because the streets were in such terrible shape. So we've actually, as bad as the streets are now, we have actually gotten most of the worst streets. Probably the last really horrible one was Emberwood, and we knocked that out in the last big street project. So the other streets are definitely a challenge, and they're a continuous maintenance, and they definitely, if we don't do something sometime in the near future, they're going to end up like those roads were, but we've kind of knocked the absolute worst out, and now we're getting into the next ones. So, but through maintenance, using either micro sealing or overlay, which there's only one overlay. We did Peplo a few years back. We put a top coat of asphalt over it. Everything else has been micro sealed, but we've done 17 streets and 7.34 miles. And then reclaim or chip seal, again, that comes out of the annual street budget. There's been 16 streets, 19.84 miles. Have been done. 3 of those streets, though, were collectors, and they really need to be asphalt because of the amount of traffic. And out of those 16 streets we've done, 5 of them probably need to be redone already from ones we did initially.
Yeah, at least that.
Yeah, because I mean, we did Hoffmeyer, we did, before David came, the county did Hoffmeyer and Tate.
East
part of
Rocket.
Tate, just from Chapman down, that needs to be redone. Yeah, so the problem with the chip seal is it's not a long-term solution. It's not really made for the traffic loads some of our roads are doing, but it's a cheap alternative, so. But the county is getting less and less they can do. It's hard for our guys to do it. It's very time-consuming for us to try to do with a staff of 7. So the list that you've got, you'll notice there's a lot of chip seal streets on there. They're actually being recommended to be asphalted streets. And some of those are residential streets that were asphalt streets, and as part of the previous street program, they went in and they tore out all the asphalt and replaced it with chip seal. So we have curb and gutter streets with chip seal, and grass grows along the edge of the road, and it's just, so those need to go back to being asphalt. So in that list, and I'll jump to that.
So David, it really doesn't work. I switched it. Oh, there it works.
Well, no, it's gonna laugh. Okay. So the list I gave you, there's 55 streets on that list. They total 31.4 miles. And when you look at the list, there's a column over there that talks about street construction costs and driver pros. So there's two different things for the streets on there. One is reconstruction. That's pretty much curb and gutter streets that be tearing out the curb and gutter because it's failing, it's sinking, it's falling apart. Going in and tearing it out, redoing the, basically what we've done on a lot of the streets we've done the last few years, if you've been on the streets. Take it, everything that's there out, start over, put in new curb and gutter, new street, new driveways and that. And then the other streets, reclamation, that's basically grinding up the existing roadway. And a lot of those are curb and gutter streets that the curb and gutter's in decent shape. Might be a few spot repairs here and there, but for the most part they're in good shape. It's just grinding up the chip seal that was put there and going back to an asphalt roadway. So the projected cost of all that, just the road work, I want to emphasize that's just the road work, is just under $26 million. Now that doesn't include right-of-way acquisition, that doesn't include drainage, that doesn't include engineering for the reconstruction, that doesn't include utility upgrades or relocations. And if you look on the list, there's a lot of those streets that says right next to them, utilities. You know, water line needs replaced, water line needs to be moved, or whatever, this is a problem water line, so. But on that list of the 50 streets, there are 8 streets that qualify, 6 as collectors and 2 as arterials, and those are the streets that are designed to take all that traffic out of the neighborhoods and bring it to the highways, bring it to, whether it's 77 or I-35 or Loop 340 or whatever. And so they're intended to be higher traffic. And like I said, at least 3 or 4 of those are chip sealed. In fact, maybe more. I had it on the slide, but because Gregg is one, Newland is one, Moonlight is one. Those are all 3 chip sealed. Well, Tate and Hoffmeyer, so more than half of these are chip sealed roads, and they really need to be asphalt roads. The collectors and the arterials, which are the higher traffic roads, they make up 13.24 miles of that. Can you go to the next one? So I just want to kind of touch base on issues and challenges. So first one, I already gave you number 25.4 million. That doesn't include drainage. Most of the reclaimed streets probably don't need a lot of drainage. Gregg Drive has 3 crossings. We need to replace the culverts. But a lot of them aren't going to have significant drainage. Some of the reconstructions could have significant drainage. So those are going to be issues that'll add to the cost. But then right-of-way easements is a big issue, and I want to touch on that a little bit more here, man. Utilities. Some of what I'm going to talk about right-of-ways and easement will lead into utilities and why utilities are such a big issue in some of these roads. And of course, as I said, drainage. Some of these, we have some areas that before we can fix the road, we need to fix the drainage, or we'll just continue to have problems because the water doesn't drain. East Moonlight, there's a section from 77 to the cemetery. There's no ditch on the left side of the road, so the water lays there and the road comes apart. And they go over and they spend, what do you guys spend, half a day, 2/3 of a day, dirt patching the entire side of the road, and then 2 or 3 rains later, it's all coming apart again. In fact, it's all coming apart right now. So,
My anxiety is already up.
yeah, yeah, but you can see we go forward, there's issues over there that keep us from going in and just fixing the drainage. So, can you go next one? Okay, so one of the things talking about money, we do have current debt. We'll be retiring over the next 20 years. And so what I have here is each year, 2029, we've got some refunding bonds that were issued. We refinanced those in 2017, but we didn't extend the term, so those will pay off. Those will create enough freed up tax rate to issue another 3.5 million. Then in 33, there's another 4.65 million. That's the 2013 bonds. And 2035 is the 2015 bonds. That's the 4.88. And then 2039 is the 2019. And even though we issued 8 million originally, the reason it's 7.5 is I'm using kind of the current interest rates, which are in 2019 we got a really, really low interest rate, and those interest rates are
think we were a little over 2%, now the rates are somewhere around 3.5, 4 on bond issues, so it's not gonna go as far. But, and then, the money we just issued, which about half of that's being paid by the TERS, this is the half that's being paid by tax rate. So that gives you your 28.58 million, so there's your money to fix your roads 20 years from now, but of course, the 25.9 million in
Yeah.
20 years from now is gonna be $55 million.
I'm gonna say, and there'll be a whole nother list of issues.
Yeah, so,
And
you
that's
know,
just,
yeah, and so there is some money out there in the future to help, but it's gonna take beyond that. There's gotta be something to do beyond that. And then, I'm gonna click this, see what it does. Either it did it or you hit the button at the same moment. Okay, so right away issues. So, a lot of Robinson, and you've been here your whole life, so you know that. It was kind of developed by the seat of the pants of the people that were here at the time. So there's a lot of properties and things that were built, properties were transferred, they came in, they developed even neighborhoods without platting the property. And the whole reason for platting process is it gives us an opportunity where we know there's gonna be streets and we need utilities to get easements and right-of-ways as part of that process. So they came in, they threw a bunch of gravel on the ground, they divided up, they built houses on both sides, and they said, you know, we wanna pave street, we wanna pave street. And over time, the streets got paved. But then everyone back and got the right-of-ways or the easements or anything. So many of our roads are not dedicated right-of-ways. In those situations, we can maintain the road, we can reclaim and even reconstruct it as long as we don't widen it. So we have that option, which is what we've done on some of the streets. Denison, for example, a lot of people ask, why is Denison so narrow? There's really two reasons. One is the drainage system over there couldn't handle a wider street, but two, there's one whole block that none of the homes are platted, so there's no right-of-way. So there's no way to widen it unless we were to go to every one of those property owners and try to buy. And everybody who wants a new street also wants money for the right-of-way. So that limits our ability to do that. And then in some of the cases, some of the collectors and arterials that really need to be wider, the structures are too close that by the time you get to the width,
at the front door.
because we require 70-foot of right-of-way for a collector and 90-foot of right-of-way for an arterial. To allow us to build the roads wide enough with the shoulders and the drainage system and everything. Needs to be in the curb and gutter. Well, in some cases, people will step out their front door and they'll step off the curb into the street if we widen the streets as wide as we can do it. So we have issues there, and then we have lots of utilities located in limited areas. So one of the things, and Greg has mentioned this, how a water line will go up the side of the road and then all of a sudden it shoots out to the middle of the road. Well, that's because we can put the water lines down in the middle of the road because we have the prescriptive, and the legal term is probably not prescriptive, that's what it means. We have prescriptive easement there. But we can't put it on the side of the road because we don't have a utility easement on the side of the road. So they're under the roads. Well, a lot of those lines are old, they're starting to fail. Newland's one. We have a 18-inch primary water line that takes all the water to the city and distributes it out, goes up Newland, it's under the road. But on the other side of the road, there's a 2-inch galvanized steel line that's been there from long before. Probably Mr. O'Dowd probably put it in there. And it's failing, and it needs to be replaced, and there's homes on it, and we really don't want to put homes on an 18-inch. But we really need to get them off because last thing we want to do is go out here and spend whatever the number is in that chart to redo all of Newland and then be out there every 6 months cutting a hole and fixing a water main break in. So that's an issue. But just kind of expanding on so this is installation. With a little bit.
The TV absorbs
No,
it.
that's not it. Oh, there it is. Okay. So just to kind of get you.
The TV absorbs it, it won't show.
Oh, it won't show it? Okay. So if you look, you'll see that all the small lots have like a blue boundary around it. Those are subdivisions. So, for example, here, you've got these 3 lots here. I'm not going to touch it, sprinkle on this. You have these 3 lots here. They're part of a subdivision. And so these are platted properties. These 2 here are platted. But the 2 at the corner of 77, these are not platted. Same thing here, these are not platted, none of these on 77. All these are platted, these are not platted, and then everything up there from Dyson on is not platted. So that means we have no right-of-way or easements along the roadway there. That's all unplatted property. And if you move further up Newland, you see it's just, once you get past that last little lot, even, Hillview there, which we have our well site there on 183-700, that property. None of those were just all divvied up by meets and bounds and sold off. The city didn't require them to plat them or anything. So we actually redid Hillside, but we had to do it very narrow because we had right away in front of those 4 homes, because when they were built, those were built, I want to say 2017, 18. We made them plat them, because that's what the law says. If you're gonna subdivide property in lots smaller than 5 acres, you have to plat them. So all the rest of the way, you can even see when you get down here in this area, you can see the property line actually goes out to the middle of the roadway. So sometimes that's just how the appraisal district maps it. You know, sometimes the mapping they'll get, it'll show a roadway there, they'll just assume it's a roadway. But in some places, they're actually the survey pins. In fact, we have properties around town, they'll be selling it, and they'll put the survey pins in the roadway. You'll
Yeah,
see
they
there'll be a
did-
nail with a little piece of.
They did that
Ribbon
right
on
across the street from me.
Oh,
Survey pins right in the middle of the road.
Yeah,
that's what that was.
Yeah.
yeah, so that'll happen. So again, that creates another challenge trying to get these roads, 'cause we don't, and so that's Newland. This is Old Robinson here. That's New 340 where the yellow is, but you can see coming down the corner on the east side of the road from Morse down to Billington, none of the streets on this side of the street are platted. And then you see right here, nothing's platted, nothing's platted here or here. And then as you come down around the bend, none of this down here is platted. And as you get further south, this is Cedar Ridge, you can see none of the school property is platted. So we have a little bit of right of way up here on the tape.
And that's
We
the
don't have
messy,
anything.
so messy there.
We don't have anything there, and as you go down, once you get down to Chapman Edition, that's all platted. Everything from Chapman down is not platted, so.
But the high school was built in the 90s? I mean, that's not a, I get some of these 70s and 60s properties that have been in the family forever and didn't change hands, but how do we miss that one? That's a new development.
That's been a law since, the law about platting has been around. If this was developed in the 30s or 20s or something, but stuff built in the 60s and 70s and 80s, it should have been platted. And again, that was a time when the city was very small, it didn't have a property tax, it had a very minimal paid staff and things like that.
It wasn't a high priority back then.
It was not a
They
problem.
just did what they wanted.
Kinda like right now where the water lines were.
Well, and planning costs money. I mean, you gotta have a property survey, you gotta have all this, so yeah, it's,
Is there no like option for cities to like for eminent domain, like where you could just,
Oof, not my favorite word.
yeah.
not nobody's favorite word, but I mean nobody's favorite, but like,
Craig said, yeah.
Yeah.
But you're gonna pay even more if doing
That
Yeah.
surefire way to
Yeah, I
piss
mean-
off some voters.
Ideally, you would think when you have these situations where people are like, man, if I could probably get a really nice road in front of my house.
right,
I'd
they
take
would be
the
like,
city
yeah,
money."
come take,
That is not how,
I know, that's crazy.
that is not
Less
how
to
it
mow.
works. My last city, I told you this, we did a bunch of drainage projects. We had flooding hotspots, we called them. People came in, and so the engineers looked at it, and we created this list, and we funded the first 6 or 7 of the projects. And the first guy we went to, we're like, okay, we're gonna come and put a new ditch down here, and instead of all this water running across your driveway and in your garage, we're gonna carry the ditch to the property line. We're gonna take it between you and your neighbor, so it can get to the creek behind you. He's like, well, that looks good, and it's like, so we need you to give us an easement right here. He says, I'm not giving you anything, if you want an easement right here, you can pay for it. We went back to city council, and they said, move him to number 25, and move the next one up the list, so
Oh,
that's
I'm
what
gonna
we
take him
did.
to call back and reconsider.
Yeah, no, he
The next
didn't.
rain, no,
Nope.
he was sticking to
Nope.
it.
And there'll be holdouts on Old Road.
Yeah.
I know.
There'll be holdouts on Tate.
Yeah, so,
It's just,
so then you have to condemn, but when
100%.
you condemn it, you have to, that process,
Legally,
assign,
it's very
the
expensive.
court assigns a board of real estate people, they review the property values. You know, they let the person put it out there, they look at what the fair values and everything is,
Yeah.
and then they set it. And you have to pay that, but then the city also gets to pay all
Right.
the costs related
Right,
to
right.
those people being on the, so that just adds on to
Yeah,
the
yeah.
cost. So it becomes a very expensive proposition, but it's one of the things that I really think is interesting, as we talk about this stuff here wasn't platted, all this stuff is gridded up here, when you get up to, when you get up there, just before, just below the 77th on the street there, that is, I think that's, no, that's Shamrock, this is Stephen. But you can see, because, yeah, the cemetery is right up here, so very much. But you can see all this is gridded off and platted, that's Robinson's original town. That was done like 80 years ago. So you could plat property way back then, and all these things in the grid, those are right of ways. There's no streets there, but they're right of ways. We have a 50-foot right of way that goes between Oscar Tires and the old pool place next door.
Really?
Yeah, it's just a dedicated, so you could plat way, way back. Why they didn't, I can't answer that question.
We'll leave this for the future to worry
This
about.
begs the question, all city properties are platted, correct? Do we have properties we need to do?
Cities, the properties the
That
city
city
owns?
owns, yes.
I can't.
I think we gotta start there. I mean,
So-
we'll, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
We can't ask anybody if we don't.
Well, any properties we're gonna develop, we'll plat them. But we can also give ourselves our own right of way.
Yeah, and I'm assuming, like a
Think
lot of
it's true.
cities, Robinson's exempt from its own ordinances, and there's a lot of cities that like to write that in there.
No, most cities plat their property.
Well, I'm just saying, like,
That's a state,
exempt.
that's actually a state law, platting property.
Rules for you and not for me.
But a lot of cities do, I mean, for like zoning and stuff, they do exempt themselves because they're providing public goods, like, you know, where you put a fire station needs to be where it's gonna best serve the public, and you don't wanna restrict the zoning, like saying, you know,
Oh,
they can
no,
only be
that's
here or there,
wonderful.
so a lot of times those kind of things are exempt, but,
Mhm.
but yeah, and we're not gonna, we can't go back and make everybody plat their property.
No.
That's not what we're saying here, it's just,
But-
if it would've been platted like it was supposed to when it was developed,
It would be cheaper now.
we would have the right of ways.
It would
we
make it
need.
easier because the right of way would
Correct.
be there.
My thought is, if we're talking about Old Road and Tate and doing those in the near future, we have to do that process. Two things come to mind. Do we have a staff to manage that process, or that's something we outsource? The second thing is, I have a hard time swallowing if we don't have our stuff platted, how are we asking somebody else to do it?
Well, I don't know, well, again, we're not asking anybody to plat their property.
And that's a big assumption on my part. that-
Yeah, we're not
that-
gonna go back and say, you gotta plat your property.
Yeah.
What we have to do now is we have to go and say, we need,
Where do we go from here?
we need, if it's a collector, we need 35 foot of right of way from most of the time the center of the road, but I'll also tell you that all the roads don't have the property lines on the center. Sometimes the road is on, you know, cause again, somebody divided it up, they put a bunch of gravel so everybody could get there. Well, did they split the property line, or did they put it all on one side? So you may have to go to one person and say, we need 70 foot of your property. The entire length of the frontage. That's what it's gonna take. That's what I'm saying, we're not talking, we can't go back and say everybody's gotta plat the property.
No.
That's not, and everyone now, if they subdivide their property in plots less than 5 acres, they have to plat it. And that's just a requirement,
Yeah.
so we make everybody do that. We do that if we're gonna develop something, but I'm sure the water plant has not been platted. Of course, water plant's also bigger than 5 acres, and it's not in the city. But yeah, I'm guessing there may be some city properties we own here and there. The property we bought for the future reservoir is not platted, but it doesn't need to be platted.
I don't mean to hang us up on that thought, but just something I
Yeah.
think it's gotta be
Yeah.
in discussion in the future on all that.
Well, like I said, we can give ourselves our own property. We're okay with that. If you know, we go out there and say, well,
you know, this section of the road, we own this half, we can say, we can draw up and have it surveyed and say, we're dedicating this half to be right of way. So we can do that, that's not a problem.
Now, in your very long spreadsheet, you didn't include Old Road in the 25 million, right? Because
No,
it's underneath.
Reclaiming Old Road is in the 25 million. And I
Okay.
have at the very end, and I was gonna touch on that.
What's the 7 million? Okay.
Yeah, so at the very end, I have, there's been discussion about, you know, Old Road needs to be widened and done, changed to a curb and gutter street. That's what that number is down below. You have
So-
Old Road, and you have Tate from Old Road to the, basically the end of the high school, right before the curb. Creating those to curb and gutter 40-foot wide streets.
And again, to get 40 feet, you're gonna have to
You're
get
gonna have to
some
get property.
property.
Yes. And along Old Road, there's a lot of places where there's not enough room to get
There's barely enough room
35
to
feet
get
on either
2
side
cars,
and
yeah.
still have room between the road and in front of people's houses. So you almost have to say,
Purchase
flip a
lots.
coin and say which side of the street goes away and then try to acquire all those properties on one side.
Then there's
Is
gonna be
there
your
one,
holdouts.
is there one side that maybe has less residential? Maybe the right side?
There's a few areas that have less, but
It's
we,
like when you've painted yourself in a corner.
so Mayor Eckerling and I met with the school district in January 23, and that was one of their questions, is what would it take to redo Old Road and widen it? And we said, we'd have to buy all the homes on one side of the street and tear them down to widen it, and they said, so it's never gonna happen.
It's
And
such a daunting task.
I don't think any of us were gonna see that. I'm not gonna see it,
Yeah.
because that's gonna be a really, really big
You'll be
project.
like, kids, come here, let me show you. Back in my day, this was.
So,
Yeah,
you know, and again, it's just the history of Robinson.
yeah.
It goes back to a few years ago, we were doing a pipe bursting project. Missy and I dug through all these sewer lines, and all we were told is there's no easements. And we had a particular property owner who would not let us on his property to do the sewer improvement. So we dug through trying to find all, and I went through all these minutes and found where, you know, and this is another one of those things. The city goes to everybody and says, we have to have a sewer system, everybody's septics are failing. We need to get an easement for sewer lines, and everybody comes to the meeting and says, well, you know, we don't want an easement because it's gonna lower our property values. So the mayor, first guy in the corner, ID, at the time, Mr. O'Dowd, who was also the city's attorney and the city's judge, said, you won't have to worry about that because we're not gonna file any of these plats. And so we found them all in a big box out there. They're all yellowed and crunchy, but they're just, the city can put it in, and 5 feet on either side is the easement. So you have to go figure out where the sewer line is. But in doing that research, I found where the city established their first street standard, and in order to build a new subdivision, you had to put down a road 20 foot wide with a minimum 4 inches of road base rock, basically. That was the city's street construction standard. That was in late 50s.
Wow.
And that was Carnes, Billington, Denison, all those homes between Old Road and 77, all in that area. Kraus, not Kraus, what's the one with all the drainage issues over there by Andrews? Carl's, yeah, Carl's, all those over there. Those were all, that's how they were built. They just put gravel down, and over time, they got a chip seal or something put on it. So, but none of those properties were platted or anything like that, so. But this is just some more, like I said, showing you down there. And then this is Great Drive. You can see there's the Walmart, it's platted. And we got, I think we got 45 feet on that. Because that's a arterial. So we have 45 foot right over there. But I doubt the rest of it is 45, because when it was platted, it's probably just 50, because it probably wasn't recognized as an arterial. But we have quite a bit of that area. And then
It definitely
down,
isn't it.
You can see Harris Village is platted, so we have right away on one side of the road, and there at Hamilton Heights and some of that we have a little bit, but then we have, of course, this is all undeveloped here. If it ever develops, we'll get right away then, but. So we can go on those streets, we can reclaim them, we can put down new road base, we can put asphalt on top, we just can't widen them, we can't put utilities along the side. If we gotta do utility work, then do it in the roadway. So back to utility issues, we kind of touched on this. A lot of old utilities, a a lot of utilities weren't installed properly, a lot of materials that don't do well in our soils, some of them are galvanized steel, which, they do good for a little while until they start to corrode. So, we don't wanna replace the street without replacing the water lines. David's guys went over and, what's the road you guys did over there?
Willard?
Yeah, Willard. They went over and did Willard. It was one of the few streets that didn't get done. It was in pretty bad shape, so his guys went over there and they reclaimed it and cleaned it all up and re-chip sealed it because it had been chip sealed. And like 2 days after they finished, the water main under the road busted. Probably from the work they were doing on top of it. So that's the risk. It's one thing to do on a chip seal road. We really don't want to do it on a road where we put asphalt on top. So we really have to take a hard look at the utilities that are under the roadways. And like I said, about half the streets have some of them are just service lines that are crossing the road and they're just too shallow. Those aren't gonna be a really difficult thing to do. I mean, you know, the water lines on one side of the street are in the middle of the road and the service lines go to the houses. And, but they're real shallow, so if we go in and reclaim it, we'll probably tear up the service lines because they're not near deep enough under the road. That's the other problem on Newland too. The 18-inch that's down there is not deep enough to lower Newland, because ideally Newland needs to be lowered and widened with drainage put in. But in order to lower Newland, we have to replace that entire 18-inch water line that runs from the water plant all the way to 77. And that is going to be a big job, and a big expensive job. So I just want to qualify. This all predates me. I'm taking responsibility. I'll take responsibility for my stuff. None of that stuff. So, but, and then, like I said, total number of streets with water sewer line issues under 27. And we have one collector that does not have some kind of water or sewer issue related to it. And then the drainage, I can't give you a drainage number because that's going to take engineering work to do. That's going to mainly come in on the reconstructions. I think most of the roads that are recommended for reclamation, there may be some small drainage issues, maybe some culverts under the road or something need to be replaced, but I don't think there's not too many of those out there that have significant, there's a few over in Celeste and stuff that we have some drainage issues. We have a drainage issue on Dyson, but we're getting ready to fix that. So a lot of those streets that are reclaimed, we can knock a big portion of the reclaimed streets out. Without drainage, but the reconstruction drainage is definitely an issue.
Well.
And that is the end of my good news.
Yeah.
Gee,
So
thanks.
yeah, it's,
Yeah, anxiety's I don't know if
yeah, so, and I'm not gonna bring up suggestions and stuff, but we do have somewhere between $5 and $6 million. The bond issue we just did, we got a little over $5 million from that we put towards streets. I have to go back and look at those numbers since the bids came in lower than we anticipated on that. How much we had already spent with some other money we had, but so it's possible we could potentially take on a couple of the current staff's recommendation would be to take on Greg especially, because Greg is just a continuous maintenance issue. Every time it rains, it starts coming apart again. And with the new bridge and stuff, we're just gonna see more traffic on it. So, and then possibly take a look at Newland or one of the other collectors. And in that, we didn't do traffic counts on every street, but I did get the police department to put the trailer out last summer on all the collectors and materials, and I did get traffic counts. And those were all done in July, and the reason I did them in July is we know there's a lot of traffic on certain streets during school, during baseball season and stuff, but I was wanting to get a feel for what is the normal traffic flow when you take those things away. So that's what those numbers represent. So like Newland, when school's out and people are home and all that, the traffic count's 3,000 plus a day. So when you see those numbers in there, those are non-peak traffic totals, just to kind of give you, they only go up. You know, Tate's going to be way higher during school. Some of those during baseball, Moonlight kind of surprised me. East Moonlight, it's over 1,000 cars a day, and that's without the Little League playing. You put the Little League down there, and that's probably.
And so, and Newland was double what any other road
Yeah,
was.
Newland was double pretty much everyone else.
pull too, so.
But I think some of it is just, some people avoid certain roads just because of the condition of the roads. Like Greg, I think there are people, I try not to drive unless I have to.
It gets plenty of complaints.
I was gonna say, I lived on Gregg before the road now, and it's beautiful. I know, I say that, because if you lived out there 10 years ago, 20+ years ago, when it was a dirt road, and then it got some chip seal, and let me tell you what, there was a spot you could catch air in, and all the kids loved that spot. And that was right
On the
across the
school bus,
neighborhood.
can you imagine?
The bus, all the high schoolers coming through there, you could catch air. But that road was horrible.
Well,
And I would defend its condition today, even though it's bad,
Yeah.
compared to where it was. It was the absolute worst time.
Well, it's
Gosh.
definitely better now, because Davidsville has probably dirt past 75% of the
Yeah.
surface.
When I first moved here, I didn't really know the roads, and my daughter would say, yeah, go on Gregg Drive. I said, which one is that? She said, oh, the bumpy road. I automatically knew Gregg Drive.
I lived on it 18 years ago, and let me tell you.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I drove my sister's Mustang there, and I went like that and it tore the oil pan off.
When I came down here looking at housing and stuff, you know, when y'all offered me the job and stuff, there was a house on Dogwood, and I drove down, turned down cars, and I was like, oh, this must be one of those roads they're talking about. And I went down and I went up Betsy, and I was like, yeah, this doesn't get, and then I turned on Dogwood, and the first block at Dogwood was, which I'm bringing those up because all those roads have been reconstructed.
Yeah, they would bring it out.
And I got the end of Dogwood. Now, from there on, it wasn't bad, but I was like, my wife would kill me if I took her over to look at the house. So I just scratched that one off the list because it beat me to death just getting halfway back in there, so.
And that neighborhood's, I mean, it's come around. I know some
Yeah,
of
that
it's.
neighborhood,
It really has.
like I said, there's bad roads out there, but the worst of the worst. When I first came here, Dale Padillo, who was over the streets and stuff, he took me up to Brewster and
Yeah.
Meadowbrook and drove me down there, and I mean, it looked like somebody had done a bombing run. There was just craters across the road. And we started driving down there, and he says, I don't know why the people that live on these streets don't come to the council meeting and just kick all of our asses. And like I said, we had a council meeting, you guys were out there. And one of the things we've done with all these reconstructions, when we go in these neighborhoods, is the engineers go and we set up a table and we invite everybody to come and we show them what we're gonna do. We try to head off problems, but it doesn't work, because we tell them we're gonna cut your trees down, and they go, oh, if I'm getting a new road, I'm good with that, and then we cut their trees down.
That's not my tree.
Those are
You're gonna have to
native Texas
replace them.
trees.
Yeah.
So,
Christmas trees.
and of course, the trees are in the right of way, usually we cut them down, but
If we have
it
one.
doesn't matter. Well, no, those, we
No,
don't
yeah.
reconstruct, those streets all have right of ways, so.
So how much are we talking about money?
Well, I can't give you the total figure, 'cause I
Can you
don't
give
know
me,
how
can you
much-
give me a
I
ballpark?
mean, I gave you
thought?
25.8 million just to do the road
Just to
part.
do the roads,
You got another 5 million in utilities,
Probably
Oh, no.
more.
probably 10.
More than that.
maybe 10.
And then engineering
Probably 10.
is.
Yeah, that's even more.
Well, so one of the things we've talked to the engineers about, there's two other things I'll throw out here and we can, we're talking to the engineers about. One of them is a lot of these streets that can be reclaimed, even if there's some utility work needs to be done on them, they don't necessarily have to be engineered. And so, one of the things we've talked about, Dave and I have talked about, and I've talked about with engineers, is creating a reclamation manual with the engineers that basically sets out the standards and specifications for reclaiming these roads. We would have to do some testing, because we definitely want to take cores. 'Cause one of the things we found is we can go one block here, and there'll be 8 inches road base, and we go to the next block, and there'll be 4 inches of road base, and we go to the next block, and there'll be 6 inches. So we need to know, at least block by block, kind of what we're working with. But there's the possibility that some of these streets, especially some of the curb and gutter streets that we already did, that we just need to go back, they don't need to be engineered. And so what we want to do is explore creating this where we could just basically have a standard bid form. We fill in all the quantities and numbers, we say, here's the specifications, and we can put them out for bid.
Yeah.
And so that will save some money there and give
Yeah.
us some opportunity. Another thing that I've asked them to look at is how we're doing the roads, which might actually make the number go up a little bit. But so when I came here, and you may remember this in the interview when y'all were talking about the roads and talking about, I was like, y'all only put 1.5 inches of asphalt on the road. How'd y'all do that? Because where I come from, we do 6 inches asphalt,
Yeah.
and everybody was like, "Whoa, 6 inches." But, so down here, everybody uses Pug Base, which I never heard of Pug Base before I came down here. Had you heard of Pug Base before you came here? He came up from the Houston area. So the reason, so what Pug Base is it's a rock that naturally occurs here, and that's why all these quarries are around. And they take, they break the rock up into a sizable amount, they mix it with cement, and they wet it. And then when they put it down, they compact it, and it hardens up like concrete. But it's one big, giant, monolithic surface with no reinforcement. So if you've ever poured concrete without reinforcement, there's one thing you can guarantee it's gonna do, it's gonna crack. And so 6 months after we do it, it cracks, and the cracks come up through the road, and everybody goes, you just did the road and it's cracking. And I was told the reason you only put 1.5 inches asphalt in it is because you know it's gonna crack. Which to me seems kind of silly, but that's how they do it in McLean County. So, I would sit there, so I asked the engineers a while back, and talking with David again, where I was at before, we required for new residential development, cement stabilized subgrade, 6 inches of, he calls it black base, we call it type B asphalt, which is a real coarse grain asphalt, and then 1.5 inch, 2 inch surface cap of finished asphalt for smooth surface. And I asked, could that work here? And the response was, well, I don't know if we've ever looked at that. So we're gonna look at that.
Yeah.
It may cost more, but if the roads don't start cracking and crumbling, because when the road cracks and the moisture gets in it, and then if it freezes, it starts eroding the subgrade, and now we're back to the problem. So, so definitely want to take a look at that. And maybe we'll probably propose maybe taking a shorter street as a test subject and just go out there and do it and see what happens.
You're talking about doing core samples. I remember before you came, the prior city manager hired a so-called roads engineer, and you probably remember. Anyway, and we had assumed that he was taking core samples periodically the whole length of Gregg Drive. And at one meeting, I asked him, well, how many core samples did you take for the whole length? And he said 2. Yeah. And all of us in the council just went, 2 samples for the entire length of Gregg Drive. That's why Gregg Drive is the way Gregg Drive is.
But its problem started before that, when they would just go put more material on it.
We could have really had a better grasp of the base situation that we didn't get.
And it was an open work site for so long.
It was still an open work site.
The biggest mess ever.
But the other thing too is, as we're doing these roads, we need to
do it
keep trying
right.
to put more maintenance money in the budget so we can stay ahead of them. Because
Don't raise taxes.
if we don't raise taxes. Because we need to be able to maintain them. So.
You gotta keep
Stay
in mind,
small.
we're sitting on fat clay,
Yeah,
and it moves.
it does.
So engineers have told me, all my life, that you build a flexible road on top of flexible subgrade.
Which isn't concrete
Which is
without rebar.
Right.
Yeah, and we didn't have as much clay where I was at before, but our roads, I'm not gonna say never crack, because they did crack occasionally, but it's frustrating here. We spend all this money, we get this beautiful road, and then 6 months later, we're having a crack seal all over the place because the pug base is cracked. So yeah, it's one of those, but so we're gonna bring this back for more discussion. I'm gonna do a little more, I've got Greg and Jacob Henson thinking about what we can do with the 2-inch water line on Greg, what the alternatives are. Problem is, there's sections of it has to be in the roadway, and there's already a 16-inch in the roadway, and there's already a 2-inch on the roadway, and in certain parts of the road, there's a sewer line in the roadway, and we're kind of running out of room where we can put more utilities under the roadway. So, that's definitely something we're looking at. The other thing we're gonna look at is our standard specifications. We put the new water lines next to the new streets, but we still put the sewer line down the middle of the street. And we're going to look at moving the sewer line to the other side of the street. Because I don't care how good a job they do compacting those things, those centers, those streets settle over time. And so, we wanna make sure as we're building new streets, we're gonna do them right, and they're gonna last, and we're not gonna have some of these issues.
We don't want the future to have to worry about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we have really tightened up the standards, especially, and part of the problem with a lot of our water line issues, you can put water lines in at clays and they'll do fine, but you gotta dig out all the material, put sand or pit run or something that's less
Surround it.
expansive around them, and depending on what the clay content is, it depends how wide the trench needs to be, and then fill it in and everything around them move, but the water line, well, here for years, Greg Hobbs will tell you, he started out working for the water department as just one of the labor guys.
Age 12.
They would go put in new water lines and dig all the dirt out, put the line in, throw all the dirt back in. And that's just waiting for water lines to break. They're gonna move, the clay's gonna move. Most of the homes, your service line. Some of us that live a little out from the new developments, I've had mine, and the mayor's had his service line come apart because of the soil shifting, because they just stuck it in and filled the hole back in. They embed it properly, so yeah, it's just some of those, so those things we're doing for new stuff, but the old stuff it's a big list, so. I know I've burst everybody's bubble here, but
Yeah, I
that's
know, we're
part of my
ending on
job.
such a sad
so.
note.
Yeah, my last city, we had a guy, he eventually became mayor, but he was on the we had a traffic transportation board, and they looked at all these grandiose plans and said, we're gonna do all this. And then I was assistant city manager, and they'd counsel go, what are you thinking? I'd say, well, we gotta consider this, and this. And he got on the council and told me, he said, you know, we spend all this time planning all this good stuff, and you come in and burst our bubble every single time.
You're a realist.
Bring you back down to earth.
Yeah, yeah.
Bring you
You're a
back down to
realist.
earth. So yeah, that's the hill we gotta climb. And we're gonna have to figure, like I said, we got some money to work with, we definitely need to do something with that. And I think we've spent so much time in the residential neighborhoods, we need to focus on some arterials and collectors. And we need to take some pressure off of his guys on some of the more traveled streets, because they're spending way too much time patching them.
So are you gonna get them to, staff to say what they would like to do with that, where they think where the money's best spent on those roads?
Yeah, we've already.
Besides Greg Drive?
Yeah, we've already started having conversations with them. And I think if we could do it today, Newland and Greg Drive would be the top two.
Oh, yeah.
Newland's near the very top of the list. Greg isn't as close to the top.
Yeah, Newland's, I think, are worse than Greg right now.
Yeah.
Of course, you got Greg Drive is now gonna get all the attention from Walmart, more traffic, more,
You know, once John Bowden Parkway connects, the traffic counts are gonna go up, even if it's not truck traffic, just more and more
People
people are
cut
gonna get through there.
but it's good to have that street. It's good to have Greg, because if you're gonna grow that area out there with industry, then
Yeah.
you need to have presentable street.
Yeah, when they start this highway construction, a lot of cars are gonna get off, go around the construction area. So we'll see traffic pick up on Moonlight and 77. Greg, unfortunately, some people, we already have a problem with Greg when there's a big accident and they have to shut the highway down.
Same with Moonlight.
People will get off and use Greg.
Yeah.
The semi trucks trying to make that turn that's a sight to see.
Well, this 4-year project coming, again, they're all gonna go down
That's gonna be a
77.
Get the
circus.
sign up.
Yeah,
was
77 to Moonlight.
There was not too long ago, a few months ago, there were big semis driving down Tate and then turning and going down the Segreto, whatever.
Yes.
And hitting, going through all that neighborhood. I
That's
don't know
my
what they were
neighborhood.
doing, yeah.
Yes.
Remember that?
Taking notes?
Get on out of here.
Those big old trucks, you know what I'm talking about? I don't know what it was.
Yeah, they're not supposed to be,
Yeah.
we have ordinances to cover that, but
We get
need
all
more
the,
cops.
we get all the trucks from the sand pit coming up East Rocket.
Oh yeah, Rocky's just a cut through, and it's a,
Well, that's
it's
a collector.
It's a derby
Yeah,
No,
with
it's
rock
not.
trucks.
Rocket is actually not a collector.
no, well, I
Not
thought
on our
it-
current thoroughfare.
It's a
plan,
raceway.
not.
No, no,
we're losing half of the East Rocket because it's falling off on the edges now.
Yeah, with all the big trucks that come through there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a county problem or that's it obviously says no trucks, no through.
No, that's ours. It's
And the
just-
county built it for us, but, I mean, it's our problem.
Mr. Mayor, when we first met during your campaign, I lied to you. We sat and
Hang on, let me
discussed
make a note.
streets.
Oh,
I said it was between 30 and 40 million dollars. Now, this number here with the alternative at just under 33 doesn't include a lot. So I need to revise my number
Yeah.
40 to 50
Yeah,
from
double it.
that conversation.
Way low.
let's just
Well,
call it
that's kinda
50
where I thought
million.
it
We
was
call it.
too.
What's that?
That's kind of where I thought it was.
Yeah, well,
Now, this, one thing I will say, I didn't, so, in the past, we were doing 1.5 inches of asphalt. We're now gonna start doing 2 inches on the residential streets and 3 inches on the collectors and arterials. Cause we need a little more robust surface.
But
On
I would be very interested though in the non-pug base, how this other deal worked, because I've always been a proponent of, I'd rather spend a little more and get it done right the first time, and then we don't have to go back and revisit so often.
I'm gonna say something that's gonna add to that. Some of these chip seal streets that are up for reclamation, especially the collectors, why are we going back with the cheap beer? We're just spending 1.2 to do Newland. What does that look like? Curb gutter drainage, is that 4 or 5? Does Newland?
Just do the roadway, but
Yeah,
when you
yeah.
add utilities,
You'd have to do
drainage and
utilities, whole
everything,
thing, yeah.
20 million? Again, you're talking about that 18-inch water line has to be replaced.
I just think that, I mean, chip seal, we all know the quality we get. The
Well,
county.
these are not gonna be chip seal, that's the thing, the roads that are currently showing chip seal in that list,
Mhm.
all those streets on that list are reclamation or reconstruction converting to asphalt.
Okay, so they would be, okay, I didn't pick up
So
the
if you
converted
redo Newland, it's a reclamation
and goes to asphalt.
and goes to asphalt. But are you saying when you do that, even just that, not the curb gutter, all that deal, that we still need to address
We need to address that
the
2-inch
water
line.
pipe, the pipe before we do that,
Yes, the 2-inch needs to be
or
done,
at the same time?
because they go out, how often do they cut into that to fix that 2-inch? A couple times a year at least? On Newland?
Yeah, at least that.
Yeah, so the 18 is a fairly new line, so it's in pretty good shape. It shouldn't be, it's just not deep enough to do a reconstruction. It's only, 24 inches under this road, I think. We'd probably have to lower the road 24 inches to go to a curb and gutter road line. Because if you come up those side streets like Dyson or Stefka or Rio Bonito, you go uphill.
Yeah, you go up.
You know, they need that, Newland needs to be lowered to that elevation, but that's why we can't do it, is because that, you know, and at the time they were building the plant and putting that big transmission line in, they didn't say, well, you know, one of these days we might wanna redo something on Newland, maybe we should put it a couple feet further down. They just, and again, that, finances were a real challenge back then, so I'm sure they did the best they could with the money they had available. You know, that's the thing cities do. We'll figure a way to get it done with what we have, it's just not always the best for long term. But you gotta get people water and stuff like that, so I mean, I understand where they were coming from, they didn't have the money to do it. And when you don't, you put it together with baling wire and.
Duct tape.
My last city, we had an issue at our main lift station that most of the sewage in the city flowed into one lift station and pumped it into the sewer plant. And they had a leak near it. They dug down there and it was old clay sewer line and there was about 20 feet of it. And it was gone and it was just rolled up shag carpet. They had gone down there and they didn't have anything to patch that clay with, so they just wrapped it in shag carpeting. And so the sewage from the entire city was going through a pipe made of shag carpet.
Oh, I can't even imagine the smell.
Wow.
And nobody writes that down and says, on this day, we put shag
Yeah,
carpeting
by the
down.
way.
So then suddenly it's failing and you got all this raw sewage from the whole city coming in, your bypass pumping and you dig down there and it's like, really?
Is that what's going on Greg by the river, that sewer smell all the time? It's shag carpet?
Shag carpet.
No, that's the
Duct
WR
tape.
interceptor. That's all the sewage coming from Waco and Hewitt.
But
And
what's the smell?
What?
I know it's off topic, the smell.
so.
I mean, is it cracked? Is it releasing?
No,
What's-
that's just, it's just,
Just wait.
there's an air relief valve there.
It's Butt River, that's what it is.
You get the same thing on 12th Street
We're
with
gonna
Flat
have that
Creek,
on tape now.
because the Flat Creek interceptor parallels Flat Creek.
Last thing I was
All
gonna
right,
say
like,
is
one more and then we'll move.
the number one and number two things of, not in the survey was roads, and then right behind it was taxes. One of those begot the other. We are gonna have to champion
if we're gonna do a project, champion these projects and really, we're gonna take it on the chin, because I've always said that the reason we have bad roads is because people were okay with bad roads. The guy doing the presentation alluded to that we're okay with bad streets, but as long as we get all these other things. I think we're at a tipping point. We've been there for a while. This conversation has been going on since 89 is the first news article I was able to find about us taking a tax. It got repealed they voted out council members, they pulled back the tax, the bond, and it was another 3 years before anybody in the city ever took a tax to fix a road. We are still talking about the same roads. The mayor mentioned it a little bit ago about if we wait another 50 years, what does this list look like? Well, it's gonna be the same roads we were talking about in 89. It's no different if we don't do something different. We are going to continue to have these discussions. There'll be another council in 20 years talking about how bad we didn't fix the problem. If
And
we
it's gonna
don't
be
do
more
something.
money, and it's gonna be, the project's gonna cost twice as much.
Yeah, kick the
It
can
never
is,
goes down.
kick the can is the worst game. It is the most expensive game. So I'm just saying that to say I hope you guys all have the courage and the fortitude to champion this, because it's gonna be painful selling that.
And you're fighting against a school bond issue at the same time.
Which is
That's right.
already,
It's already,
facing so much backlash, and that's,
I said, it didn't take long for that to turn ugly.
did it?
look at the signs.
So, I mean, we're gonna take one on the chin if we do anything significant about this, and I'll just be prepared for that.
Well,
So,
the mayor's compiling a list of people to volunteer for political action.
that's an inside
That's
joke.
how I got here.
Yeah.
Political Action Committee.
That's it, political action
Knocking on
committee.
doors.
We're gonna talk some more. I just figured to get you all start thinking, because
We
I sent you that
appreciate
big,
it.
No.
I sent you that really big piece of
Yeah.
paper with lots of.
That was again, that was a pile of work.
It's
That was but,
daunting.
you know, when Craig and I talked about it to begin with, it was like, well, everybody just needs to know where we stand again now versus where we were. So, thank you for the hard work and
Can we,
all that
I
information.
know y'all done a good job of communicating that. Can we get that list and some pictures, some video out there I mean,
Oh,
perception is one thing. We have
will.
made a dent.
We will. And I would strongly recommend we have some more town hall meetings as we go.
Absolutely.
If we could
When
get
you were-
anybody to come.
you gotta
Yeah,
get people
that's
to
true.
look.
Mr. Master, when you were up north, did the communities you were up there, did they do assessments for streets?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, see, that's a foreign concept here.
Oh, yes.
There's some places in the country, and they don't do it for the main collector stuff, because everybody uses it, but for residential streets, when it's time to redo them, they come in and they say, you got 100 foot of frontage, it costs this much per foot, you're gonna pay 50% of that to the center of the road, and you can either pay it up front, or we'll tack it on your tax bill for the next 20 years. And then they pay for the new road in front of their house.
They also didn't have
Everybody's only paying
ISDs.
for their own road.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
such
really?
a weird concept.
All comes under the city budget.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah, and then they they finance it, and
Yeah,
payments that the people make, but instead of everybody pitching in to pay for everybody else's road, everybody pays for their own.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's-
But that's a pretty foreign concept down here, because I worked for a city when I was in the police department, they were building new roads, and they wanted to assess the driveways, just the drive approaches, not the road, just the drive approaches. That got real ugly real fast.
I can imagine.
All right.
Burned City Hall down.
Well, that was an informative discussion
Yep.
that will
Illuminating.
keep moving for a while. All right. Does anybody have anything that they would like to talk about adding to any future agenda besides the item that we just got through talking about?
I wanna figure out a Saturday for us to volunteer at the Shepherd's Heart Food Pantry. I don't know if that needs to be an agenda item, or just like we collect a few dates where they're having it, or we can try to pick a date where we could volunteer for it.
Is that a agenda deal or just a pass around deal?
I think if you don't,
Tina Hokamp's daughter, I can't remember her name, that old Rock Cafe's one in.
Yeah, Brittany.
Yeah, Brittany, yeah.
yeah, I mean, we can stick it on there if y'all just wanna discuss the date
Yeah.
that works for everybody.
That might be a good,
Can you move that around in an email, like, here's the dates, and everybody can come up with what they, okay, let's do it that way. Let's do that one by email. All right, anything else? Okay, 8:51, we're adjourned.